Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Elisa Matthewson. This story takes place in a small town called Valrico, Florida, with a population of about 5,000 people. Elisa was a devoted wife and a caring mother. She had been married to Trevor Summers for over 15 years, but eventually decided to file for divorce. The reason for this is Trevor's relentless need to control every aspect of Elisa's life and their children's lives. When Elisa informed Trevor of her decision to divorce, he vehemently opposed it. He began using their children as tools to manipulate her, hoping she would reconsider. Elisa and Trevor first met in 1995 while attending high school in a Philadelphia suburb. They started dating 3 years later and quickly formed a strong bond. Both were outgoing, charismatic, and serious about their future together, but they felt unprepared to settle down when to their lack of career achievements. They decided to prioritize building their careers before starting a family. In 2001, after years of dating, Elisa and Trevor got married, marking an important milestone in their lives. Their friends and family fully supported their decision. At this time, their relationship had stood the test of time. For Elisa, marriage was the realization of a long-held dream of creating a family. Soon after, they welcomed their first child, a daughter named Arden. Over the years, they had 4 more children: Landon, Bryn, Grady, and Cooper. Elisa found joy in growing their family, believing that each child added more love to their lives. However, Trevor had different priorities and chose to focus on advancing his career. Trevor initially a landscaping business, but soon moved on to launching a pool building and maintenance company. After that, he ventured into real estate and pursued various other business ideas. He was passionate about being an entrepreneur, and Elisa supported him in all his efforts. However, Trevor often started businesses quickly, and most of them failed before making any significant profits. He struggled to find a clear direction, and most of his ventures didn't generate much income. Trevor's constant pursuit of new opportunities caused the family to move frequently. Over the years, they lived in Pennsylvania, Florida, Vegas, and California, finally settling permanently in Sunshine State. These relocations made homeschooling necessary for their children. Elisa took on the dual role of teacher and homemaker, while their eldest daughter, Arden, helped with chores. Despite her many responsibilities, Elisa managed everything with ease. The family often hosted guests and lively gatherings where Trevor would enthusiastically share his latest ideas. They lived in a beautiful house near the beach, creating the appearance of an ideal life. Over time, their relationship started to fall apart. Arden, the eldest daughter, recalled many happy moments. The family often spent time together at the beach, played video games, or enjoyed board games. While Arden was always close to her mother, she had an especially strong bond with her father and was often called a daddy's girl. Sadly, this close relationship later allowed Trevor to manipulate the situation. As Arden entered her teenage years, Elisa began to notice how Trevor exerted more control over her and the children. With each new child, his dominance grew, affecting every part of their daily lives. Elisa was eventually restricted to wearing only clothes Trevor approved of, socializing only with people he allowed, and having her social media activity closely monitored. He prohibited her from speaking to men online and displayed extreme jealousy. Trevor's possessiveness escalated to the point where he forbade Elisa from standing or sitting near any male strangers at church. He would become upset even if she simply walked past or greeted someone she knew. Some people, including Elisa, believed that Trevor's extreme behavior was tied to the family's financial troubles. By that time, Elisa had witnessed several business dealings that revealed Trevor was deeply in debt, often failing to pay others or collect money owed to him. He was even arrested multiple times on suspicion of financial fraud. Each time, Trevor shifted the blame onto others or external factors. It became increasingly clear that he was not suited for the business world. Despite his repeated failures, Trevor stubbornly defended his business ventures and refused to let Elisa have any input. At the same time, he tightened his control over their home life, becoming harsher and creating an even more oppressive domestic environment. By 2016, Elisa had grown weary of her life and decided to ask for a divorce. However, this was not part of Trevor's plans. He pleaded with her to stay for the sake of their children and promised to change. Still in love with him, Elisa decided to give him another chance. Unfortunately, instead of improving, Trevor became even more controlling. He confiscated her phone and car and forbade her from leaving the house, effectively trapping her as if she were a prisoner. It became clear that this was outright domestic abuse and highly dangerous. Elisa began contemplating ways to escape, unaware that Trevor was also making his own plans concerning her. By October 2016, Trevor's control over Elisa had reached an extreme level. For weeks, he had not allowed her to leave the house even once. He monitored her every move around the clock, never letting her out of his sight. This behavior alarmed Elisa, as she sensed that something terrible was about to happen. She feared what Trevor might be planning and anxiously waited for an opportunity to break free. One day, Trevor left the house to run errands but locked his family inside. Taking advantage of the rare opportunity when he was absent, Elisa secretly used her phone to contact an organization that supports victims of domestic violence. She explained that this was her first chance in weeks to act without Trevor's control. The organization warned her that her situation was urgent and extremely dangerous. That evening, when Trevor returned, he lashed out at Elisa, accusing her of ridiculous acts of infidelity and subjecting her to further emotional and physical abuse. Thankfully, the authorities had already been notified, and their timely arrival at the house pressured Trevor into letting Elisa and the children leave. Reluctantly, he agreed, though it was clear he had no intention of letting go quietly. Elisa soon faced housing challenges, forcing her and the children to seek refuge in a shelter for domestic violence survivors. The shelter provided them with protection from Trevor's control and allowed them to feel somewhat secure. Over time, the harassment stopped, much to Elisa's relief. After several months in the shelter, she believed their ordeal was over and moved out with the children. With the support of social services, Elisa secured a place to live, a car, and a job, and she began the process of filing for divorce. Convinced that Trevor was out of her life for good, she felt optimism about the future. Encouraged by her newfound freedom, she even started exploring online dating and meeting new people. However, Elisa was wrong in her assumptions. After the divorce was finalized and custody arrangements were settled, she had to meet Trevor twice a week to exchange the children. These meetings were filled with noticeable tension, but no further aggressive outbursts occurred. By January 2017, Trevor seemed to have accepted the situation. A month later, he called Elisa, claiming there were some divorce-related documents she needed to sign. Trusting his recent calm demeanor, Elisa went to Trevor's house without any suspicion. At that time, Trevor's life was falling apart. He was facing possible imprisonment due to fraud allegations, and the image he had carefully crafted as a successful businessman and devoted family man also was crumbling. When Elisa arrived, Trevor tried to provoke her into a conversation, accusing her once again of infidelity and demanding a confession. In reality, there were no documents for her to sign. This was merely a ruse to draw her into a confrontation. When she attempted to leave, Trevor grabbed a machete, pressed it against her chest, and then held it to her throat. He kept her in this terrifying situation for several hours. Elisa eventually managed to calm him down and convinced him to let her go by promising not to call the police. Despite her promise, Elisa contacted emergency services as soon as she left. When the police arrived, Trevor denied everything, claiming she was lying and even threatened her life. Since there were no visible injuries on Elisa, the police believed his version of events. Following this incident, both Elisa and Trevor filed restraining orders against each other. Trevor began to take advantage of the situation to make the kids believe him, telling them that she was trying to send him to prison and take away his time with them. Trevor continued to build his narrative, blaming Elisa for the family's breakup. He told the children that he planned to reunite with them, and they eagerly believed him. The children were unaware of Elisa's living situation or the danger Trevor posed to her, as he had never directed his abuse at the children. This ignorance allowed Trevor to keep his growing children unaware of the true situation and the danger he represented to Elisa. Arden was manipulated by Trevor into becoming his informant. She spied on her mother and reported back to him. On March 11, 2017, Arden followed Trevor's instructions and informed Trevor when her mother went to bed with the younger children. She also left a window open for him. That night, Trevor arrived at Elisa's house with Landon, who stayed in the car, while leaving his 3-year-old son, Cooper, home alone, asleep in bed. He broke into the house, attacked Elisa, and took her phone to prevent her from contacting the authorities. He then dragged her into the living room, where the children ran out to check on their mother. Trevor ordered the children to return to their rooms and stay there until he allowed them to come out. Meanwhile, Arden remained in Trevor's car, watching over Landon. She believed that her parents were calmly talking and working out their problems, and that they would soon come out so they could all return to their dad's house and be a happy family again, just like before. But that outcome never came to pass. Around 4 a.m., Trevor sent his daughter a message saying the plan had changed. He instructed her to enter the house. When Arden came inside, Elisa saw her daughter and painfully realized that her daughter had sided with Trevor. Trevor then told Arden to take the other children to the car and drive them to his home. He assured her he would return later with Elisa in her car after resolving their reconciliation issues. The girl Arden trusted her father and agreed to help. While the inexperienced teenager desperately tried not to get into an accident on the road, Trevor tied his ex-wife to the bed. Over the next few hours, Trevor made wild claims about having millions of dollars in offshore accounts, preparing a yacht, and planning to escape into international waters. During this time, he repeatedly assaulted Elisa, using a weapon to intimidate her. He also forced her to take sedative medication, causing her to periodically fall asleep during the abuse and making it impossible for her to resist. At one point, Trevor used Elisa's phone to record a video in which he described his plan, in which he said, "I'm here with Elisa at her house, which I'm not allowed to be in. I woke Elisa up and held her against her will." Around 6 a.m., he tried to suffocate her by placing a pillow over her face and sitting on it. Desperate to survive, Elisa agreed to whatever he demanded, including going with him to the yacht and fleeing into international waters. Trevor eventually decided to leave, taking Elisa with him. She did not resist because she understood that Trevor was not in control of himself in these moments and was extremely dangerous. It was clearly a matter of life and death. They got into the car and started driving. About an hour later, Trevor parked near a supermarket on the outskirts of town to buy some supplies. While he was getting out of the car, Elisa managed to jump out, screaming for help. She ran toward a young man working at the supermarket, who had just stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. Before she could reach him, another man, large, muscular, and leaving the store with his shopping bags, grabbed her. He twisted her arms behind her back and forced her back into the car. "That man is Trevor," then got into the driver's seat and drove away. The supermarket employee, alarmed by what he had witnessed and suspecting a kidnapping, called 911. He provided authorities with the car's make, color, and license plate number. The car was quickly identified as that of Trevor Summers. A man had recently gone through a contentious divorce. Investigators quickly looked into Trevor and realized Elisa had previously filed several domestic violence complaints against him. This information painted a deeply troubling picture. Suspecting foul play, detectives decided to visit Elisa's home, where she lived with her children. However, when they arrived, the house was empty. The children were eventually found at Trevor's house, being cared for by Arden. When asked about their parents' whereabouts, none of the children could provide an answer. It became increasingly evident that Elisa had been kidnapped and was in grave danger. Understanding the sensitivity of the situation, the police opted to speak carefully with the children to avoid alarming them. Both parents' phones were turned off and untraceable, leaving the police with no immediate leads. Instead of scaring the children with suggestions that their mother may have been abducted by their father, officers gently questioned them to assess the situation. As the children described their parents' relationship, the police were shocked, especially considering the young ages of the witnesses. All the children recounted incidents of Trevor abusing Elisa. Though the children themselves were never physically harmed, they recalled seeing their mother tied up by Trevor, with her hands and feet bound for hours. That evening, Arden unintentionally helped him with his plans. While on the phone with her father, Trevor convinced Arden that he wanted to reconcile with Elisa and repair their relationship. He instructed Arden to leave a window open after everyone in the house had gone to bed, claiming it was part of a plan to surprise Elisa. Trusting her father's intentions, the naive girl complied. This gave Trevor access to the house, and without realizing his true motives, Arden unknowingly became complicit in his scheme. During the night, while the rest of the family was asleep, Trevor entered the bedroom where his ex-wife Elisa was sleeping. Her 7-year-old daughter, Bryn, and 5-year-old son, Grady, were also in the room. Elisa woke up to something wet dripping on her face and, still disoriented, sensed a threatening presence. Standing over her was Trevor, pressing a damp cloth against her face. Overcome with fear, Elisa screamed and struggled. At first, she couldn't identify who it was, but she soon realized it was Trevor. Frantically, she threw objects from her bedside table at him in an attempt to defend herself. However, Trevor grabbed her by the ankles, dragged her out of bed, and onto the floor. Her loud screams woke the children, who instinctively realized their father was attacking their mother. They cried and pleaded with him not to harm her. Trevor then dragged Elisa into another room, warning the children to stay out. What exactly happened to Elisa in that room remained a mystery to the children. Hours later, Arden took the children and drove them to their father's house. The police were continuing their search for Trevor. Based on the children's statements, detectives reconstructed the events and used the information to initiate a detailed search for Trevor, attempting to predict his escape routes. However, what the children didn't know was that Trevor had access to a yacht and millions of dollars, giving him a possible advantage in evading authorities. Before that, when leaving the supermarket, Trevor drove Elisa along rural roads near the Tampa Bay coastline, stopping occasionally in isolated areas. Enraged by her escape attempt, he retaliated by slashing her wrists with a razor and yelling at her. Eventually, he took her to a small, abandoned town, where they stayed for more than a day. During this time, Elisa saw Trevor writing suicide notes addressed to his children and the police. He continued to assault her throughout the ordeal. Despite the horrors she endured, Elisa focused on thoughts of her children and remained determined to survive for their sake. On the morning of March 13, Trevor and Elisa arrived in Little Harbor, a resort area where they had frequently vacationed as a family. Elisa immediately saw this as a bad omen because the location held significant meaning for Trevor, and she feared it might be where he planned to end both of their lives. Trevor parked the SUV behind a dumpster, moved to the back seat, and wrapped a rope around Elisa's neck. For several moments, he strangled her, and Elisa felt she was on the verge of death. Suddenly, Trevor let go of the rope and moved to the driver's seat. He sped off down a dirt road toward the beach. Unbeknownst to Trevor, police vehicles were closing in from behind. Then, when he realized he couldn't escape, he stopped the SUV, took out the razor he had previously used to threaten Elisa, and began slashing his own throat. Elisa screamed in terror, pleading with him to stop. The police surrounded the vehicle, forcing Trevor to drop the blade. They quickly helped Elisa escape from the horrific scene. Despite her injuries, Elisa survived. Both she and Trevor were taken to the nearest hospital for treatment. Trevor's injuries were not life-threatening. Elisa later gave a detailed account of the abuse she had endured at Trevor's hands. However, even then, Trevor denied any wrongdoing. He claimed Elisa had gone with him willingly, asked to be tied up, and consented to the violence as part of her interest in extreme intimacy. This blatant lie was dismissed by everyone. Trevor faced 11 charges, including attempted murder, kidnapping, abuse assault, and endangering the lives of his children. He denied all accusations, which delayed the trial. Additional setbacks arose from bureaucratic issues. Thankfully, Trevor was denied bail and remained in custody, allowing Elisa and her children to feel safer. Trevor spent 5 years in detention before preliminary hearings began in 2022. Prosecutors argued that his actions were premeditated and that Elisa would have died if the police had not intervened in time. In contrast, his defense attorney claimed the events were a coincidence caused by the stress Trevor had been under due to his wife's behavior. The defense even argued that Elisa had asked to be kidnapped and treated roughly. However, the prosecution's case was strong, supported by overwhelming evidence that disproved Trevor's claims. This included a video Trevor had recorded himself, handwritten confessions, suicide notes, and testimony from a store employee Elisa had approached for help. Physical evidence, such as the pillow he used to smother her and the ropes used to restrain her. Consequently, the defense's version sounded completely unconvincing. Elisa testified in court against her ex-husband Trevor, declaring she was no longer afraid of him and was determined to see him sentenced to life in prison for the 55 hours of torment he had inflicted on her. Despite this, the case was far from over, and much depended on the eloquence of Elisa, the prosecutor, and Trevor's attorney. During several hours of questioning, Elisa provided detailed accounts of the abuse she suffered before the kidnapping, including acts of torture, physical violence, and threats. Her testimony appeared to deeply resonate with the jury. Following her statements, Trevor underwent cross-examination. His testimony lasted over an hour, but as he spoke, the prosecution seemed increasingly confident in their case. It became evident that their position was stronger. Despite this, Trevor's defense attorney continued to search for weaknesses in the prosecution's arguments, aiming to minimize Trevor's culpability. Much of the defense's questioning focused on the abuse allegations. The attorney tried to convince the jury that everything had been consensual, thereby attempting to undermine the prosecution's case. They also tried to portray Elisa as manipulative and deceitful, claiming she had intentionally pushed Trevor to his breaking point, triggering his aggression and subsequent actions. Elisa and Trevor's children are 13-year-old Bryn and 19-year-old Arden, also participated in the hearings. Bryn had vivid and clear memories of the night her father assaulted her mother. The children's fear was unmistakable, and it became increasingly apparent that Trevor could no longer evade justice. When asked about the wound on his neck, Trevor claimed it was the result of emotional distress, stemming from a stressful situation. The defense attorney emphasized that Trevor had no prior criminal record or history of violence. Nonetheless, the incident with Elisa severely undermined his credibility. The hearings lasted 3 days. In closing arguments, the defense attorney contended that the alleged kidnapping was merely Trevor's misguided attempt to reconcile with his wife, which had spiraled out of control. Elisa, however, firmly asserted that she had narrowly escaped being murdered and described Trevor as extremely dangerous. In a last-ditch effort, the defense questioned whether Elisa had been attacked in her home, pointing to the absence of blood, broken furniture, or other signs of a struggle. The claim that she had been tied up in a car in a supermarket parking lot was also contested. However, these arguments resembled the desperate attempts of a defense team that had become entangled in its own inconsistent versions of events. The jury deliberated for over 5 hours before reaching a verdict. Ultimately, they found Trevor guilty on all charges. For Elisa, justice was finally served. Overcome with emotion, she broke down in tears and fell into the arms of Jeff Mathewson, whom she had met shortly before the 2017 attack. Jeff had been a constant source of support throughout her ordeal. Elisa believed her ex-husband's aggression might have been fueled by his jealousy of Jeff, while others speculated that Trevor's actions stemmed from his despair over losing control of his life. In 2021, Elisa married Jeff, describing him as the person who made her feel truly safe for the first time. In later interviews, she spoke openly about the devastating impact Trevor had on her life and family, as well as the extreme and dangerous measures he had taken. Trevor's manipulative behavior, particularly involving their children, left lasting scars. Arden, one of their children, struggled to relearn how to trust others, a process made even harder by the cruelty they had witnessed from an early age. The court sentenced Trevor to life in a Florida state prison, along with an additional 224 years to be served consecutively, ensuring he will never be released. Despite this, Trevor remains determined to appeal the sentence and is actively pursuing that effort. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Natalia Martinez. Natalia Martinez was born in the late 1980s in Montevideo, the capital of Uruguay, and she was the youngest daughter in her family. While not much is known about her personality, she had a close relationship with her relatives, especially her older sister, Claudia. Her father was a senior salesman for a large international company that sold household appliances, which allowed the family to live comfortably. Natalia was a cheerful and friendly girl. During her teenage years, she formed a close-knit group of friends who supported one another during difficult times. These friends later described her as sociable and able to connect easily with strangers. After graduating from high school, Natalia began spending more time with her friends. They enjoyed going to various parties and eventually expanded their adventures by visiting the beaches of Uruguay for fun. To celebrate her 19th birthday on January 1st, 2007, Natalia and her friends planned a trip to La Paloma, a small resort town, where they stayed for 2 weeks. On January 16th, they traveled to a nearby resort in the city of Reales, where Natalia was delighted to meet her parents and sister, who were there for a 4-day vacation. The Natalia family had a wonderful time enjoying beach activities and were well known in the town, as they frequently visited. They often returned to the same places, making it feel like a second home. On January 18th, Natalia and her sister Claudia decided to drive to Punta del Este, another tourist town less than an hour away from Reales. They planned to stop at a popular local spa located about halfway between the two towns in the Serra San Antonio area. After their beauty treatment, the girls planned to go to a disco with 3 of Natalia's friends. However, as the evening approached, Claudia felt very tired and decided to go home to their parents. Despite this, 19-year-old Natalia Martinez was determined to stick to her plans. She wanted to enjoy herself, so she went with her friends to a popular party at the local nightclub, La Erin, Canada, where they stayed until around 5 a.m. As morning approached, the girls decided to leave the party and head home. At that time, Natalia was talking with a man named Leonardo Roccovan, an old acquaintance who owned a bookstore. They stopped near the exit and continued their conversation. However, Natalia became so engrossed in her discussion with Leonardo that her friends decided to go outside and get into the car they had arrived in, planning to head home together. The girls got tired and got into the car. One of them decided to check on Natalia, but when they returned to the nightclub, they found that Natalia and Leonardo were gone. The friends realized that Natalia could not have left alone or with anyone else without letting them know. Since they did not see her leave, they began to worry. They went up to the second floor, out of the bar, and saw Leonardo's BMW in the parking lot. The owner was inside the car, and because the windows were tinted, Rosalia and Silva could not see if anyone was in the passenger seat. However, they did notice some movement inside the car. The girls called out to Leonardo to ask about Natalia. He said he was in the car with a friend and mentioned that he had spoken to Natalia briefly before they parted ways. He claimed he had no idea what happened to her afterward or why she didn't return to her friends. The girls assumed Natalia had gone home, so they got into the car and drove to her friends' relatives, who were at the police station, just a 10-minute drive from the club. Rosalia and Silva stopped near the house and honked to get Claudia's attention, trying not to wake the entire family. However, no one responded, so they returned to the club where they last saw Natalia. The girls continued to search for their friend for about 2 hours, but their efforts were unsuccessful. No one knew where she had gone. Around 8 a.m., Silva returned home, exhausted and very worried about her missing friend. Worried about her friend's safety, she decided to tell her parents everything that had happened. She feared something bad might have happened to her friend. Her parents tried to reassure her, telling her to rest and that her friend was probably already home. So, she went to bed. Yet, when she woke up at 11 a.m. that same day, her concerns grew stronger. The entire Natalia family started searching for she. They quickly got involved, and her friends went to the club together to find out what happened. Unfortunately, they were still unsuccessful. The club was closed, and no one had any helpful information. They searched the surrounding area for clues but found nothing. Around 5 p.m., Natalia's family and friends arrived at the police station. Maldonado police investigators received several photos, including one of all the girls relaxing at a club that evening. This helped them understand what the missing girl was wearing so they could come up with a description for the search. The police took their statements seriously and began investigating. Initially, the family said that Natalia had been at a party where she may have had too much to drink and left with someone. However, Rosalia and Silva insisted that Natalia had not consumed any alcohol that night, as she often denied. They also dismissed the police's suspicions that they had used illegal drugs. Police began a search operation. They first went to the location where Natalia was last seen. The club was open, but there were no surveillance cameras at the time. Police spoke to club employees and learned that a group of 3 young men sitting at a nearby table had been trying to approach the women throughout the evening. Natalia's friends confirmed that the men had been harassing them. Despite this information, police ignored the group of young men and instead focused on the acquaintance with whom Natalia had been talking before she disappeared. It was no surprise that Leonardo immediately became the prime suspect, since he was the last person to see Natalia. However, all of Leonardo's acquaintances described him as a kind and calm person who had never shown any signs of cruelty before and was incapable of harming anyone. He was a young businessman. That night, his girlfriend waited for him in the car while he was talking to Natalia. After that, he said goodbye to Natalia and returned to the car with his girlfriend. From the car, he saw Natalia go down the stairs and go out onto the porch. From that moment on, Leonardo was distracted by his conversation with his girlfriend and did not see Natalia again. However, he was not worried about her, since he did not notice anything suspicious around. No one was screaming or making noise. Despite the police suspicions, Leonardo insisted he had nothing to do with Natalia's disappearance. However, the police did not trust him. They needed to conduct a thorough examination of the BMW he drove away in after the party. Several witnesses reported seeing a similar car in various locations around the city, including near a forest on the outskirts. One man claimed he spotted a couple having sex in a car that matched the description on the night she went missing, near a lake by the woods. Police obtained a search warrant for Leonardo's car. During the initial inspection, they found a long, dark hair on the floor of the BMW and sent it for analysis. However, it did not match Natalia. It belonged to someone else. The interior of the car showed no signs of suspicious activity, no blood, or evidence of a struggle. Police speculated that Leonardo had cleaned the car shortly after Natalia Martinez disappeared, which would explain the clean condition of the car. Police used this detail as part of the evidence against Leonardo. However, they still lacked the evidence to arrest him. On January 22nd, a passerby driving on the outskirts of Polis discovered several items on the roadside. Among them were a woman's handbag containing a wallet and a pair of women's shoes. The most crucial piece of evidence was linked to Natalia Martinez, a case that was currently receiving significant media attention. Recognizing the situation, the witness promptly contacted the police. Unfortunately, the media coverage also led to the spread of various rumors, which Natalia's family had to repeatedly deny. One such rumor suggested that Natalia was involved with drug dealers, implying that she had become a victim of criminal activities. However, Natalia's father publicly refuted these claims in an official television statement. Despite the situation, rumors continued to spread. Some claimed to have witnessed her being attacked or even murdered. Instead of receiving assistance from the media, police found themselves overwhelmed by numerous false testimonies each day that needed to be verified, complicating the investigation. Meanwhile, the media eagerly reported even the most outrageous theories. The story was considered compelling and attracted many readers, causing journalists to add fuel to the fire of chaos surrounding the case. The rumors about the missing girl were leveraged to boost newspaper sales. Natalia's family endured immense pain following her disappearance. A large-scale search operation was organized, involving many police officers, friends, family members, and hundreds of volunteers. It was quickly determined that there was no evidence of the girl near the nightclub, prompting the search to extend into more distant areas of Uruguay. Ultimately, the entire coast was thoroughly searched. Most of the search operations took place on land, using service dogs, and later involving military and civilian aircraft. The City Fire Brigade also participated in the search and requested that the sewer systems be inspected. However, no traces of Natalia were found there either. By this point, law enforcement had largely concluded that Natalia was deceased, as the likelihood of finding her alive was very low. The critical window for finding missing persons is usually 48 hours. A significant finding occurred when a bone was discovered on the Grande Plateau, but tests revealed it was not human. Although the search had stalled and no new leads had emerged, Natalia's relatives continued their efforts. They remained hopeful that she was alive and being held against her will. In 2000, a female body was discovered in the forest near Lake Yolo. The body was in poor condition and was sent for examination to determine the identity of the deceased. This location was several kilometers from the club where Natalia was last seen, and the clothing found on the body led police to suspect it might belong to the missing Natalia Martinez. After the discovery of the body, police remembered a couple who had been seen having sex in a car near the forest, which drew attention to that area. The forensic expert who performed the autopsy struggled to gather important information because the body was in an advanced state of decomposition. To ensure a thorough examination, 5 forensic experts were called in. They determined that the body belonged to Natalia Martinez. Their overall assessment suggested that she likely did not die of natural causes, as there were faint signs of strangulation on her neck. Although they ruled out poisoning from substances or alcohol, they could not find evidence of physical or sexual violence due to the body's condition. It was noteworthy that the victim was found tied with nylon thread, but it remained unclear whether this occurred before or after her death. Several months later, while the investigation continued, an unexpected development arose. The man who had found her belongings on the roadside was discovered dead at the bottom of a cliff near his home. His name was initially kept confidential. Initially, it appeared that the man had voluntarily chosen to end his life. However, all his relatives insisted that he would never do such a thing. He was a deeply religious man, cherished his life, and loved his family. An autopsy revealed that the cause of death was blunt force trauma to the head, sustained long before the fall from the cliff, suggesting he had been thrown off. This led police to believe the two cases were linked. But more evidence was needed. The next tragic event involved Natalia's father, Ever Martinez. He had fallen into a deep depression after his daughter's death and the damaging rumors that were circulating about their family. He ended his life at home by shooting himself in the head. His body was discovered by his daughter Claudia and his wife. The police closed the case after confirming that he had acted alone, a conclusion that the family accepted. For a long time, police struggled to make progress in the investigation into Natalia's murder. However, new information emerged from text messages exchanged with a friend just days before Natalia's death. In these conversations, Natalia mentioned a man she had recently met online. It was later discovered that he was one of the men who had been at the nightclub on the day Natalia went missing. These three young men were sitting at a nearby table, and several witnesses had pointed them out from the beginning of the investigation, but this information was overlooked. Police identified all three suspects, who were slightly older than Natalia. After interviewing them, the police became even more suspicious of their involvement, as the men contradicted each other in their statements about where they were and what they did during the night and morning of that tragic day. After this, the police interviewed a witness whose identity was kept confidential for her safety. She was the girlfriend of one of the men who had been arrested. Her testimony revealed that a young man in the group, Rodrigo Verghese, was involved in Natalia's murder. At the time, he was 25 years old, and police later stated that he had previously provided false statements. During the interrogation, police recorded phone conversations that implicated the Rodrigo main suspect. They collected DNA samples from him, but these were not helpful for the investigation due to the advanced decomposition of the remains. After that, the police reached out to the friends and relatives of the Rodrigo. A young man was called to testify on June 8, 2010, along with his friends who had been at a nightclub on the night of Natalia's murder. They all claimed they had no involvement in the incident. They stated that after spending the night at the club, they hired a sex worker to join them in their continued festivities. However, they denied any connection to Natalia. Rodrigo, the prime suspect, denied spending time with the murdered woman and claimed he did not know her. However, messages from the girl revealed that they had spoken online and planned to meet at a party, suggesting that Rodrigo had lied. Initial questioning did not turn up any clues, but a day later, police spoke to the young people again in the hope of getting a confession. This time, Rodrigo confessed. He explained that he had met Natalia online and after chatting for a while, they decided to meet at a club. Unfortunately, their conversation did not go well, and as dawn approached, he suggested they go to another nearby nightclub. Rodrigo misled her. He wanted to be alone with her. During this time, he began to harass her, according to his confession. When she rejected his advances, he seemed to accept it. However, Natalia then suffered an asthma attack, which led to convulsions and ultimately her death, as she did not have her inhaler or any medication with her. Rodrigo was confused and unable to help her. He stated that he panicked during her attack and didn't know what to do, especially when she stopped showing signs of life in his car. After the party, he planned to return to his family's farm, a short distance from the city. However, after Natalia's death, he decided to dispose of her body to avoid any further repercussions. He headed for the woods, thinking it would be a good place to hide her. There, he tied Natalia up, dragged her deeper into the woods, and covered her body with branches. But this was only part of the story. A witness walking along the beach claimed to have seen a couple having sex, and Natalia's body showed signs of strangulation. It seems that Rodrigo neglected to mention that he had strangled and raped her at the same time. Police were later able to confirm that Rodrigo's other friends were not involved in the incident, so they were released shortly after Rodrigo confessed. Rodrigo was formally charged with murder and taken into custody. After the confession, it appeared that the prosecutor's office would easily prove the Rodrigo's guilt. However, in mid-2010, as preliminary hearings began, Rodrigo Verghese recanted his confession. He claimed he admitted to the murder under police pressure and insisted he did not commit the crime. This assertion seemed unlikely because his confession included numerous details only the actual killer would know, including the precise location where the girl's body was found. Still, Rodrigo maintained his innocence. Despite the evidence against him, his defense team supported his statement and sought to demonstrate that Rodrigo was not at the club that night. They presented mobile phone data and a statement from his employer confirming that he had been working his usual evening shift that day. The next day, he attended a friend's wedding, and no one noticed anything unusual about his behavior. On September 2, 2010, Leonardo Roccovan, the bookstore owner who was initially the main suspect in the investigation, was called as a key witness for the prosecution. Leonardo testified that during a conversation, he had an argument with a young man. Leonardo identified the young man as Rodrigo. This indicated that Rodrigo was definitely at the nightclub and not at work. Natalia's friends also confirmed that he was at the nightclub that night. Forensic experts, working with the prosecution, provided insights based on the autopsy results. They noted that, due to the typical symptoms of asthma, the girl could not have died from an asthma attack so quickly. While she did experience an asthma attack, it could not have occurred instantaneously. It took several hours. Additionally, there were signs of strangulation on the victim's neck, which was likely the cause of death. Unfortunately, the experts could not provide further details about the victim's injuries. From late August to mid-September 2010, the prosecution successfully constructed a narrative of the crime, leading to Rodrigo Verghese being found guilty of Natalia Martinez's murder. He received a 9-year prison sentence. However, in February 2011, Rodrigo's lawyer submitted an appeal, claiming that the court's ruling was incorrect and that the prosecution was biased. The lawyer argued that they failed to present a witness to the kidnapping or murder, nor did they provide any compelling direct evidence. Natalia's family expressed disappointment, saying that the criminal received a lighter sentence than the family had expected. Disappointed by this leniency, Natalia's relatives filed a civil lawsuit against Rodrigo Verghese for causing harm to Natalia's family, holding him responsible for her father's death. Initially, they mentioned that Rodrigo should pay $15 in damages. However, after further discussion, both parties agreed to increase the amount of damages to $7,000. The court rejected the request for a longer sentence. On October 27, 2014, the lawyer achieved his goal when Rodrigo, 29, was pardoned after serving only 4 years and 2 months in prison. His release was largely due to his good behavior while in custody. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Corey Brininger. Judith Hawkey was born on January 9, 1967, and grew up in a rural area of Ohio, USA, with her parents, She was a bright and cheerful child until a tragic accident changed her life. At the age of 3, Judith was hit by a car and suffered serious injuries, which took a long time to recover. During this time, she lost contact with her friends and had difficulty studying. Fortunately, she eventually fully recovered and returned to normal life. However, her family life was troubled. Her parents had a difficult relationship and ended in divorce. After the divorce, Judith's mother moved to another city and remarried. Unfortunately, her mother's second marriage was not as good as her first. Because of the distance, it was difficult for Judith to maintain a relationship with her biological father. As Judith grew older, she often thought about moving away, but her mother forbade her until Judith was 18. The tense atmosphere at home created many challenges for her, but Judith was determined not to accept her situation. While in high school, Judith felt it was time to make significant changes in her life. At 17, she dropped out of school and moved to Arizona to live with her biological father. However, she did not stay there long. She began dating a boyfriend and moved to Alaska with him. The daily challenges took a toll on their relationship, and they eventually returned to Ohio together. In 1991, the couple realized that they could not work through their problems and decided to separate. Judith then began a new relationship with a man named Kot. Their relationship developed quickly, leading to pregnancy and marriage. They welcomed a daughter together, and for a few years, their relationship seemed stable. However, just as quickly as their romance began, it ended and they divorced. In 1998, she met Robert Breininger, a divorced man who lived with his son Corey, whose mother had abandoned them. Judith and Robert began dating. Robert and Corey lived in a small house in the small town of Man, Ohio. Judith quickly became attached to both of them and eventually moved in with them. Judith and Robert later married, and it seemed that Judith had finally found happiness. The three of them lived happily together. This brought great joy to Robert, who had long wanted to have a complete family. Robert worked long hours, which meant that he could not spend much time with his son. His wife Judith took care of the boy. Robert worked at a metallurgical plant in a nearby city, where he often had to work night shifts, which left him very tired. He was used to going to bed around noon and always wearing earplugs to block out any noise while he rested. During this time, Judith focused on taking care of her son and managing the household. It seemed that the family situation had improved and everyone was comfortable until the tragedy happened. On November 3, 2003 in the afternoon, 10-year-old Corey got off the school bus and started walking home. That day, Judith met him at the bus stop, which was unusual. Corey got off the bus with some classmates who lived nearby, just before 4 p.m. Judith took Corey to their home, where Robert was resting after his night shift. Corey went inside, but Judith did not go in. Instead, she took some of the other children home, worried about their safety. Despite the peaceful surroundings, tragedy was about to strike just minutes later when an explosion echoed throughout the quiet area. Corey went into his father's room and, while playing, accidentally pointed a loaded pistol at his father's head and pulled the trigger, killing him instantly. After the incident, Corey called 911 and told the police that he had accidentally fired a gun at his father. At only 10 years old, Corey did not realize that his harmless prank could lead to such tragic consequences. Shortly after, Judith ran into the house, horrified by the scene before her eyes. When the police arrived at the house, Corey was in shock. He quickly confessed to the police that the incident was accidental. He pointed out where he had taken the weapon. Robert died from his injuries before the ambulance and police arrived. Initially, a forensic scientist examined the scene and said that it is unlikely that a child would practice using a weapon in his sleeping father's room. Forensic evidence showed that the weapon was only inches from Robert's head, which contradicts the boy's story. It seems absurd to bring murder charges against a 10-year-old. Corey was always considered a good boy. Despite the inconsistencies discovered during the investigation, the police accepted the boy's story as true. Corey was not charged with murder and did not face any consequences for the incident. The police did not consider the possibility that anyone else was involved. It was also noted that after Robert's death, Judith, as his beneficiary, received a substantial $500,000 insurance payout. She then took Corey out of town. In October 2011, Judith married a man named Harry. He adopted both her and her adopted son, Corey. Harry was deeply moved by Judith's past, including her tragic relationship with her ex-husband and her adoption of Corey. It seemed like Judith's life was getting better. However, in March 2012, Corey suddenly revealed to one of his teachers what really happened that tragic day with his biological father. He revealed that the incident involving his father was not an accident. His revelation shocked the teacher, who then shared it with other colleagues. Corey spoke to several teachers at the school, sharing details of the tragedy involving Robert. He holds Judith responsible for his father's death, claiming that Judith deliberately gave him the weapon and forced him to kill his father. The teachers at the school reported this information to the police, who were shocked by Corey's account and decided to interview him directly. Corey gave them a detailed explanation of his story. Corey claimed that Judith had lied to him. She shared a story about Robert suffering from a serious malignant brain tumor. She convinced Corey that the doctors could not save his father because the disease was too advanced and that he would soon die. She also mentioned that his father had talked to her about wanting to die, as it would allow his family to quickly collect a substantial life insurance payout. She argued that this would ensure their financial security after his death, and she implied that death was his final wish. Corey reluctantly agreed. Corey confessed that on the day of the incident, Judith had met him at the bus stop after he had returned from school. She had given him specific instructions, telling him that weapon was in the laundry room and loaded. Robert was asleep and seemed resigned to death. The plan was for Corey to get weapon and kill his father as a way to end his suffering. Although Corey was hesitant, Judith convinced him. She assured Corey that because of his age, he would not face consequences if he killed someone, meaning that their family could escape legal consequences. It was all part of a carefully planned plan laid out by Judith. She instructed him on how to interact with the police and what to say to them. Judith followed her instructions exactly. After the incident, Corey suffered no consequences, but over time he began to realize that he had made a terrible mistake. Corey discovered that Robert was not sick and that Judith had been lying to him. Corey confessed that she had been abusive to him. Judith even created situations where he could be harmed and encouraged him to jump from high places. One Halloween night, she threw him into a pond while he was in costume, hoping he would drown. Corey believed that Judith had done everything she could to get rid of him. Corey shared vital information with the police, revealing that Judith's new target was her husband, Harry, whom she had been trying to poison for years. According to Corey, she had repeatedly added suspicious powders to Harry's coffee in an attempt to harm him. Corey's revelations shocked the police, prompting them to take a closer look at his claims. They decided to bring Judith in for questioning. Judith was furious at Corey's accusations and denied any involvement in Robert's murder or the attempted murder of Harry. She claimed that Corey's stories were a figment of his imagination. However, her denials did not inspire confidence in the police, and they continued their investigation. In March 2013, Judith was arrested and charged with insurance fraud, aggravated murder, and 4 counts of endangering the life of a child. She pleaded not guilty to all charges. The trial began on October 28, 2013, with Corey serving as the prosecution's star witness. He testified about the deceit and cruelty he experienced from his stepmother Judith. Several teachers testified in court that they had seen bruises on Corey's body and initially thought they were due to his carelessness. However, as the bruises became more frequent, they began to question the situation. However, no one saw Judith abusing Corey or putting him under physical or mental pressure, as he claimed. Judith's attorneys argued that there were no documented cases of Judith's cruelty reported to police or doctors, and that the teachers' opinions were based solely on Corey's testimony. After his father's death, Corey did not identify Judith when he spoke to police. They observed both Corey and Judith closely, but did not notice anything unusual in their behavior or relationship. Corey appeared calm around Judith, and there were no signs of fear or tension between them. At the time, Corey had no bruises. There was no direct evidence against Judith in the police records, but Corey's testimony had a significant impact on those involved in the trial. On November 8, 2013, the jury found Judith Hawkey guilty on all charges, and she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Corey spoke to the media, claiming that Judith had finally gotten the punishment she deserved. He said he had carried this burden for years and had suffered cruelty. However, the situation took another turn. In 2016, she and her attorneys filed an appeal that was accepted. The judge determined that the 3 key witnesses who testified against Judith in the first trial had based their testimony primarily on Corey's account. Although none of these witnesses were found to be biased, the defense highlighted numerous discrepancies between Corey's testimony and the actual evidence collected at the crime scene. Judith explained that the boy was angry with his father because he was sending him to military school due to his poor grades. Corey objected to this decision, but Robert persisted. Judith claimed that this situation was the motive behind the murder. A new trial was scheduled, and upon learning of this, Corey vowed on social media to fight for his freedom and independence. He vowed to do everything he could to keep Judith in prison. During the retrial, Judith maintained her innocence and accused Corey of fabricating stories against her. Many of her supporters believed that she was innocent and was wrongly convicted due to lack of evidence. On the other hand, some believed that Judith actually pressured Corey to kill his father. On the day of the murder, a neighbor saw Judith meet Corey at the bus stop, which was unusual as she had never done so before. She helped him and even hugged him, which was out of character for her, as she usually interacted with Corey and others in a rather cold manner. However, this time, she seemed much kinder and more affectionate than usual. When police arrived at the scene, Judith tried to calm Corey down and maintained a calm and affectionate demeanor, which was unusual for her. The day after Robert's death, Judith contacted the insurance company and quickly gathered all the necessary documents to file an insurance claim. In a short time, she received $500,000 from Robert's life insurance policy. This quick action and her apparent lack of grief set off alarm bells for the police. A key incident involved Corey climbing a scaffolding platform at Judith's request, causing him to fall from a height and sustain multiple injuries. Medical records confirm this. Corey accused Judith of causing the fall by urging him to climb. The medical team that treated his injuries found no signs that he had been regularly beaten or abused. Additionally, Corey alleged that Judith removed him from the medical center before he completed his treatment. However, a review of the center's records did not substantiate his claims. In fact, he completed his entire treatment only after Judith took him home. Documentation from specialists showed that he did not suffer any serious injuries or health problems and that he was properly discharged. Judith was monitored by Social Security, and subsequent examinations did not find any signs of bruising or abuse that Corey reported. Corey said that his stepmother did not feed him, but medical reports did not mention any signs of malnutrition, exhaustion, or similar problems. The police then spoke to a psychiatrist who was treating Corey. During his treatment, Corey told the doctor that he often slept in the laundry room because his mother wouldn't let him sleep. He had mentioned that he didn't have a bed, but the Supreme Court found this to be false. He did have his own room, and many photographs confirmed this. Corey's accusations that Judith had tried to poison her new husband, Harry, were unfounded. Harry underwent a toxicology test, which showed that he was healthy and no poison was detected. Corey then admitted for the first time that he had lied. He wasn't sure if Judith had actually put poison in Harry's coffee or if it was sugar. The police then noticed striking similarities between Corey's story and a book about child abuse. The author of this book had been abused for a long time as a child, which raised the possibility that Corey's account was based on the book. Corey spoke about his experiences of being bullied by Judith, and his story seemed to match a book he had read. He claimed that he had endured years of harsh treatment and had noticed that his loved ones had become increasingly aggressive over time. The lawyer pointed out that Judith had denied Corey food and thrown him into a pond were false. The defense suspected that Corey had lied about Judith's involvement in his father's murder, believing that Corey was simply trying to draw attention to himself. Initially, despite some inconsistencies, Corey was considered a credible witness. Over time, however, he began to be seen as unreliable due to his frequent lying and constant changing of his story, which he apparently based on a book about a bullied child. Many people saw Judith as a cruel woman, leading them to assume that she was guilty. Locals did not believe that Corey had willingly taken up arms and killed his father. To them, he seemed like a good kid, and they accepted his story without question, ignoring the inconsistent statements and the lack of any evidence against Judith. As part of a plea deal arranged by the prosecution, Judith Hawkey was sentenced to 10 years in prison, of which she served 5. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Candy Montgomery. Candy Montgomery was born on November 15, 1949, into a military family, which meant that she moved frequently throughout her childhood. Candy's bubbly personality made her stand out. At the age of 20, she met Pat Montgomery while they were both working at a tool and equipment company. In the 1970s, Pat was employed as an electrical engineer, while Candy worked as a secretary. Pat was hardworking and responsible, and his income provided stability and comfort in their lives. At first, their relationship faced many challenges. Candy found Pat unattractive. However, her views changed when she heard rumors about Pat's income from family friends, which made her want to give him a chance. In 1977, they decided to get married, and soon after, they moved to Wiley, Texas, a small town that is an ideal place to raise a family, offering a low crime rate and a quiet atmosphere. Candy, a devoted wife and mother, settled into her new home with Pat and their 2 children. She became active in social events, attended church, and sang in the local choir. Additionally, she also became a member of the Parents Committee and earned the respect of the community, with many people looking up to her. Overall, the Montgomery family had everything they needed for a comfortable life. They got along well with their neighbors and regularly attended the local Lucas Methodist Church. Many considered them a typical American family, with a daughter and a son who received plenty of love and support from their parents. Soon after moving in, Candy met a local school teacher named Betty Gore. They joined the church choir together, and their daughters quickly became close friends, often spending the night at each other's homes. Candy and Betty also became friends, occasionally attending school events and church together and frequently seeing each other on weekends. Gradually, Candy found her home life boring. She began to take an interest in Betty's husband, Alan Gore, whom she met at social events in town. Betty had met Alan when he was a teaching assistant at the university. Initially, Betty's family disapproved of their relationship, believing that Alan was too quiet and unsuitable for her. However, They fell in love and ignored their parents' concerns. They married in the 70s and later welcomed their first daughter before moving to Wiley. Alan was a hard-working family man, but his job often required him to leave town. Betty did not enjoy these absences. She preferred when Alan was home with her and their daughter. Whenever he was away, she had to manage the household and care for the child by herself. Although she kept in touch with Alan, she often expressed frustration about his business trips and her excessive exhaustion. One day, Betty called Alan's boss to ask him to stop sending Alan on business trips. This was impossible because he was an irreplaceable, first-class professional. Over time, Betty's frustration grew, leading her to frequently contact Alan's manager while he was away. Some speculated that her behavior suggested she might be suffering from postpartum depression. Instead of seeing Alan's job as an opportunity for financial stability and family happiness, Betty viewed it as a burden. She may have exaggerated her situation, especially since other women had dealt with similar problems more easily. Her situation may have been worsened by the fact that she had few friends. The relationship between Alan and his wife Betty became increasingly strained. Alan felt additional pressure from Betty, who could not understand the necessity of his business trips. These trips were essential to his high salary, which he could not afford to lose. Betty could be a difficult person, so Alan tried his best not to upset her as their marriage began to show signs of trouble. He started staying late at work more often, hoping to avoid arguments. Betty faced challenges even before she became pregnant. Likewise, Candy had her own struggles, and both of their marriages were deteriorating. When Alan and Candy met, they felt an immediate attraction and saw each other as an escape from their problems. However, they were both married, went to church, and lived in conservative communities, which made the idea of an affair terrifying for them. In October 1978, their situation changed dramatically. After a volleyball game in the church community, Candy expressed her feelings and proposed to Alan that they start a relationship. Alan, who was feeling frustrated with his own marriage, was intrigued by the suggestion but remained hesitant. A week later, during another volleyball game, Alan's interest in Candy increased significantly. He spent the entire week pondering her words. At this point, the tension between him and Betty was escalating. Seizing the opportunity, Candy reiterated her proposal, and this time Alan could not refuse. Meanwhile, Candy also felt anxious about the situation. She confided in her close friend, a church pastor, about her desire to have an affair, although she did not reveal who she would be involved with. Candy's friend tried to convince her not to go through with it, but Candy remained silent about her intentions. When Alan agreed to the relationship with Candy, they both made a list of pros and cons and established strict rules to follow. The main idea of their agreement was to keep their relationship purely physical. It seemed that Candy wanted to avoid emotional connection in order to maintain her relationship with her husband and simply have fun on the side. She convinced Alan to adhere to these rules. The rules stated that they would meet in the city, pay $23 cash for a room, and Alan would cover half the cost. Their meetings became frequent, always focused on intimacy. They could only meet for short periods and never spend the entire night together. A key point in their agreement was the requirement to avoid any emotional connection. They agreed that if either of them showed any feelings, they would end the relationship immediately. Candy found joy and excitement in this new relationship. However, her husband Pat was a good man, a loving father, and a reliable provider for the family. So she continued to maintain a stable relationship with him. Surprisingly, Alan's marriage also seemed to improve. Betty became less annoying, and Alan even began to see the positive aspects of his marriage. He started to spend more time at home with his family. During this time, an important event occurred. Betty became pregnant again, which brought genuine joy to both her and her husband. To celebrate Betty's pregnancy, Candy threw a party. Over time, the relationship between Candy and Alan began to change. They started to see each other less often. Alan also wanted to spend more time with his children and focused on saving his marriage with Betty. Alan began attending a church program aimed at restoring and strengthening marital relationships. After participating in the program, he realized that his relationship with Candy should end. On the way home, he avoided eye contact with Candy, making it clear that he did not want to continue their affair and had chosen to focus on his marriage. Alan even changed jobs to reduce his business trips. He ended the relationship and refused to see Candy. Candy felt deeply hurt by this decision. At first, she tried to suppress her feelings, but the emotional bond they had built over the year became too great. She was even more disappointed when Alan ended things. She felt used and discarded. After a while, Pat Montgomery discovered a postcard with a congratulatory message addressed to Candy. Pat realized that Candy had been involved in an affair. However, he was not angry with his wife. Instead, he blamed himself for the situation, believing that he had neglected her. At this point, only Betty was unaware of the recently ended love triangle. Pat decided to follow the same path that had helped Alan improve his marriage. He took Candy to a church program designed to strengthen the relationship between husband and wife. The program lasted about a year, and it seemed that Pat did not consider Candy's affair to be significant. Betty still did not know what had happened, but everything changed on Friday, June 13, 1980, at 10 a.m. Candy went to Betty's house to pick up a swimsuit for her eldest daughter. She then went home and continued her day as usual. At the same time, Alan was away on business. He tried calling Betty at home several times, but no one answered. This worried him, as it was unusual for her not to respond. She often waited for his phone call and sometimes called him several times an hour. Her sudden silence concerned him. Alan then asked the neighbors to check on her. Late in the evening, the neighbors returned and knocked on Alan's door to check, but there was no response. They searched the grounds with flashlights but found nothing unusual outside. When they entered the unlocked house, everything seemed normal. In the kitchen, they noticed 2 empty glasses on the table. However, when they called out, no one answered except for the sound of a child crying from the basement. When they went down to the basement, they found Betty dead. Betty's body was so badly disfigured that it was unrecognizable. The neighbors quickly called the police and informed Alan of their discovery. Forensic experts determined that Betty had suffered 41 axe wounds. The murder weapon was found just a meter away from her. Betty's face was so badly damaged that the only way to identify her was through dental records. One of her hands, which may have been used to cover her face during the attack, was nearly severed. Most of her injuries occurred after her death. The violent nature of the attack suggested that the attacker knew Betty well. There was no sign of robbery or abuse. It appeared to be a personally motivated attack. Unfortunately, DNA evidence was of no help to the police at the time. The murder shocked the entire city, which had never experienced a homicide before. People were scared, worried that a dangerous criminal might be lurking in their neighborhood. Residents were eager to help the police catch the brutal killer, but the investigation was just beginning. At the time of the investigation, advanced technologies such as DNA testing, surveillance cameras, and cell phone tracking had not yet been developed. The police focused on Betty's surroundings, examining her relationships with her family and neighbors, but everyone had a solid alibi. Upon hearing of the tragedy, Alan immediately called Candy, knowing that his eldest daughter was staying at her house overnight. He checked to make sure the child was safe and shared the sad news about his wife. Candy feigned shock upon hearing the news of Betty's death. Forensic experts were working at Betty's house, trying to collect any evidence to link the events. They later discovered a fingerprint on the refrigerator door, along with bloodstains that clearly showed a shoe print. The police focused on Alan as the prime suspect, since it is not uncommon for a husband to kill his wife. It was believed that the murder may have occurred in a fit of rage. Meanwhile, the police arrived at Candy's house. She remained completely calm. However, upon hearing that the police had discovered a shoe print in Betty's house, she quickly tore it into small pieces and threw it in a trash can a few blocks away. When Alan returned home, he was questioned by the police. Alan was asked about possible infidelity. He maintained that he was faithful to his wife and insisted that she could not have had an affair. After questioning, he was released, but the next day he returned to the police to confess to the lies regarding the infidelity, which he said troubled him. The police discovered that there was, in fact, an affair involving Betty's best friend Candy. Furthermore, he mentioned that he had decided to end the relationship himself, which could have been a motive, to have visited Betty on the day of the murder to pick up a swimsuit. Police discovered that she was the last person known to have seen Betty alive. Additionally, the time of Candy's visit coincided with the estimated time of Betty's death. Meanwhile, Alan had a solid alibi, as he was out of town on business during the incident. As a result, Candy became the prime suspect and was brought in for questioning. She admitted to going to Betty's house that morning, where they chatted and had coffee together. According to Candy, nothing unusual happened, and she left with her swimsuit about 30 minutes later. She acknowledged having had an affair, but stated that the relationship had ended long ago. Both Candy and Alan insisted that Betty did not know about the affair. The experienced police suspected that Candy was hiding important information. They offered her a lie detector test, but she refused, apparently terrified, which only heightened the police's suspicions. The fingerprints collected at the crime scene matched Candy's. On June 26, Candy was arrested for murder, but her husband posted a $100,000 bail, allowing her to be released the following day. Case documents were collected and reviewed over the next week, during which the attorney began to formulate a defense strategy, knowing that a trial was inevitable. The entire city was shocked to learn of the killer's identity, but many refused to believe it, and even helped her husband raise money for bail. No one could have imagined Candy wielding an axe and attacking her best friend, Betty. Although she initially denied any involvement in Betty's death, she later confessed to the attack on the advice of her attorney. The confession came under circumstances that, under state law, likely allowed her to avoid punishment. The case was widely reported in the media. According to the prosecutor's office, Candy stated that she had visited Betty to pick up a swimsuit for her daughter. During their conversation, Candy suddenly revealed that she had slept with Betty's husband. Betty then went down to the basement to get some things, and Candy followed her. While in the basement, a struggle broke out between them, during which Betty brandished a weapon to attack Candy. Candy suffered multiple cuts on her hands while trying to defend herself until Betty finally struck her in the head. Candy believed she had sustained severe scalp injuries and experienced temporary amnesia. She claimed to have suffered several other injuries as well, but somehow managed to retrieve the axe. She did not remember what happened next, and only regained consciousness after washing off the blood in the bathroom. To avoid facing the consequences of her actions, she changed into Betty's clothes and chose not to go back to the basement. The prosecutor's office found this argument hard to believe because of the violence involved in the case. The extent of Betty's injuries suggested that this was a serious crime and not self-defense against an aggressive friend. The prosecution argued that it was a premeditated murder motivated by jealousy. Furthermore, there were very few injuries on Candy's body. Only a scratch on her toe was noted. The trial began on October 20, 1980, and attracted considerable media attention, filling the courtroom with over 200 people. The defense presented several witnesses, including pastors and church members, who testified that Candy was a loving mother, wife, and good person. Candy testified confidently and answered every question without hesitation or confusion. The jury called an independent psychiatrist from Houston, who used hypnosis during the evaluation. He supported the defense's argument, stating that she had unconsciously been in a rage due to a head injury related to a childhood incident. The psychiatrist argued that in her rage, Candy unconsciously recalled a traumatic memory from her childhood, which led to her violent emotional reaction. The independent experts concluded that Candy had unintentionally killed Betty. Alan, Betty's husband, testified in Candy's defense during the trial. Alan mentioned that in the last days of Betty's life, her mental health had declined. She was struggling with postpartum depression and was irritable. Betty believed that her husband had been unfaithful, but he denied it, although he had ended the affair. Candy's attorney used this testimony to argue that Betty was in a state of mental instability, driven by her husband's supposed infidelity, which led her to try to harm Candy. The jury found these arguments persuasive. After deliberating for over 3 hours, the jury found Candy Montgomery not guilty. Betty's family and friends were shocked and shouted angry comments at Candy as she left. This was her attorney's first criminal case, and the outcome was a surprising victory for the defense. Alan later remarried, but his second marriage ended quickly. Candy and Pat, her husband, felt compelled to leave the city due to pressure from the local community, and they moved to Georgia with their children to start over. Over the years, the couple tried to save their relationship, but eventually they separated. After the split, Candy chose to return to her maiden name to avoid public scrutiny. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Annie Lou. Annie Lou was born on July 3, 1985, in San Jose, California, to Vietnamese immigrant parents Vivian Van Lou and Hogan Lou. She was their only child and demonstrated exceptional intelligence and talent from a young age. Annie excelled in school, particularly in chemistry and biology, and was often recognized as the top student. Teachers predicted that Annie would have a successful future in science, and even said that she might one day win a Nobel Prize. Annie regularly participated in school scientific conferences, where her work received numerous awards and prizes. In high school, Annie won a $65,000 scholarship to attend any university in the United States. She chose the University of Rochester in New York, where she studied cellular development biology and medical anthropology. Annie focused her dissertation on diseases caused by metabolic disorders and dedicated significant time to laboratory work. She made significant strides in her research, contributing to the treatment of diabetes mellitus and certain forms of cancer. During her time at the University of Rochester in New York, Annie met Jonathan Widowski, a talented student and aspiring scientist specializing in physical and mathematical sciences. Their relationship blossomed quickly, and their parents were delighted with their children's choice. Then Annie pursued a master's degree at the prestigious Yale University, simultaneously, she working in a scientific laboratory. While her partner, Jonathan, pursued science at Columbia University in New York. Although they were physically far apart, but their relationship remained strong, thanks to weekend visits and sharing plans for the future. During the summer of 2009, Jonathan proposed to Annie with a diamond ring, and she accepted happily. The couple set their wedding date for Sunday, September 13, 2009. Initially, they only shared the news with their parents, keeping it a secret from friends and colleagues. However, on September 6th, just a week before the wedding, Annie sent out emails to friends and colleagues, sharing the news of their upcoming marriage and including a wedding invitation. The following day, the news became a major topic of discussion in Annie's department and lab. The couple had intended to hold their ceremony on Long Island, followed by a honeymoon at a popular Greek resort. Notably, just before that, Annie wrote an article for a university publication in which she warned students about various dangers and advised them on how to protect themselves. Annie left her university dormitory, where she lived with 3 friends, and headed to her workplace at the University Medical Center's laboratory on Amistad Street. On Tuesday, September 8th, she entered the building around 10 o'clock in the morning, using her pass and special key card to gain access. CCTV footage captured her entering the building, and she was seen going straight to her office. There, she changed into work clothes, left her personal belongings behind, and put on a medical coat. She then locked her office door and went to work in the biolab. However, she never returned to her office or left the building that day. It appears that she vanished somewhere within the building's corridors, and no one saw her alive again after that. That evening, Annie's dorm neighbors were very worried and felt that something was wrong with Annie, because they saw her not returning and not answering her phone. Typically, Annie was very responsible and punctual, always returning at the same time, but as midnight approached, she was still missing. Her friends decided to report her disappearance to the police. As it turned out, Annie's parents and fiancé had also been unable to reach her that night. They initially thought she might be working late due to a heavy workload and will contact them when she is free. When the police arrived, they assumed Annie was nervous before the wedding and she might have gone somewhere to relieve her stress. However, police opinions later changed when they examined Annie's office, reviewed CCTV footage, and tracked her movements within the building using her key card. Things revealed that Annie had entered the building in the morning but never left. Her personal belongings, including clothes, bag, wallet, and cell phone, were still in the office, but she disappeared. Due to lack of concrete evidence or clues, the Federal Bureau of Investigation had to get involved. They searched for Annie and interviewed potential suspects. People close to Annie described her as intelligent, kind, cheerful, and energetic, with no known enemies. Annie's family and fiancé waited anxiously for news. They hoped that she would be found alive. However, the detectives didn't think so. When they looked at the situation, they concluded that Annie was likely no longer alive. The laboratory building was secured and treated as a crime scene. Because access was restricted to staff and students with name badges, the pool of suspects was clearly defined. The atmosphere at the university was tense, as everyone understood that a possible murderer might be among them. Jonathan was questioned by authorities. However, he had a solid alibi, having been in another state at the time of the incident. He was extremely worried about the situation and appeared to be close to having a nervous breakdown himself. One of the teachers and Annie's supervisor was initially suspected, having canceled his lectures on the day she vanished and couldn't provide an alibi. But after further questioning, his involvement in the case was deemed unlikely. Despite this, police still believe the culprit was someone in the Yale University lab, possibly a student, faculty member, or staff. On September 12th, a disturbing clue was found in a building, providing the first concrete evidence that Annie had died. A blood-stained medical coat was found, hidden under the false ceiling in an auxiliary room. Although the coat didn't belong to Annie, tests confirmed the blood was hers. This led authorities to officially declare Annie dead and reclassify the case as a murder investigation. The following day, September 13th, Annie's body was discovered on the technical floor of the laboratory. Tragically, this was the day she was supposed to marry her fiancé and leave for their honeymoon in Greece. Her remains were found in a narrow pipeline within the wall, where she had been forced headfirst. Due to her small stature, less than 150 centimeters tall, so hiding her body in this narrow space likely wasn't difficult for the perpetrator. A service dog, trained to detect the scent of decomposition, was instrumental in locating her hidden remains. The police observed that the body's placement indicated the killer was familiar with the building's layout, as it was a nearly ideal location to conceal the remains. Annie's body showed severe injuries. Most of her ribs were broken, her limbs were damaged, and several teeth were missing. However, according to the forensic report, the cause of death was mechanical asphyxiation. In simpler terms, Annie was brutally beaten and then strangled. Subsequently, her lifeless body was placed in a pipe in the basement wall. They noted in detail was the discovery of semen traces on Annie's clothing, but further examination revealed that she had not been raped. A prime suspect emerged a few days into the investigation. Raymond J. Clark III, a young technician, had caught the attention of the police. When questioned, along with other lab employees, he claimed to have seen Annie leave the building on the evening of her disappearance without her belongings, suggesting she intended to return. However, his testimony raised suspicions. After Annie's body was discovered, Raymond became the prime suspect. The police collected a DNA sample from him and asked him not to leave the country until the investigation was concluded. On September 17th, he was arrested. The autopsy results showed that the semen on Annie's clothes was his, and his coat had traces of her blood hidden under the hanging ceiling panels. Additionally, Raymond had suspicious bruises, indicating Annie had attempted to defend herself. Despite the overwhelming evidence, but Raymond denied any involvement in the crime. However, further investigation showed that Raymond was a very hot-tempered person and often had conflicts at work. He had frequent verbal altercations with colleagues and was known to be abusive to the women he used to know. Raymond's academic record was unimpressive, but he excelled in sports. He has quite an attractive appearance and was popular among girls. Although his low grades prevented him from attending university, his relatives helped him secure a job at a laboratory. Initially, he worked as a janitor, but eventually earned a promotion to technician after a few years. During this time, Raymond dated Jessica Del Rocco. However, their relationship was troubled. Jessica later testified in court that Raymond was controlling and violent. She claimed he would check her phone, read her messages, and dictate what she wore and who she socialized with. If she disagreed with him, he would become physically abusive. After one particularly brutal incident, Jessica fled to another state to escape him, fearing further persecution. Despite this, she never reported him to the police. For the past year, Raymond had been in a romantic relationship with Jennifer Radko, a student at Yale University. Despite rumors of his infidelity with other students, graduate students, and lab employees, Jennifer accepted his marriage proposal and began wedding preparations. Although there is plenty of evidence of Raymond's guilt, but his motive for the crime remained unclear. He never revealed his motive, even after fully admitting his guilt. Initially, it was believed that the murder was caused by a workplace conflict. Raymond and Annie had been conducting experiments on lab mice to study the effectiveness of enzymes in treating cancer, diabetes, and other diseases. The mice were under Raymond's care, and he considered the lab his domain. He was a strict rule follower and often came into conflict with his coworkers, whom he would report to their superiors. On the day of the murder, Annie stayed late in the laboratory, entering an area where experimental animals were kept. Raymond, who may have already cleaned the area, also entered. There was then a possible confrontation between them, which eventually led to Annie being strangled in a fit of rage. An alternative theory suggests that Raymond had been trying to court Annie for a long time, but she had rejected him. This rejection made Raymond very angry, because he was someone who was not used to being rejected. When he learned of her upcoming wedding, Raymond became consumed by jealousy. The next day, he found himself alone with her in the laboratory and attacked her, attempting to rape her before strangling her. This theory could explain the emergence of seminal fluid on Annie's clothing, but it has never been proven conclusively. The case received widespread attention from the start, as the murder occurred on the campus of a prestigious university and the victim was a graduate student and a rising star in the sciences. The investigation was closely followed by the media. Notably, Raymond's ex-girlfriend, Jessica Del Rocco, participated in several interviews where she openly discussed her past relationship with Raymond. Raymond's first court appearance was on October 6, 2009, in Connecticut. At this time, he denied any involvement in the murder and refuted the charges brought against him. The hearing was postponed several times to collect more evidence and documents related to the case. Investigations revealed that Raymond had been in the company of Annie in the laboratory for at least an hour, during which time Annie was brutally murdered. To hide his crimes, he used his key card over 50 times across various locations. Eventually, he reached the technical floor. Here, he spent approximately 15 minutes concealing the body Annie's within a wall. Shortly after, the fire alarm was triggered, which Raymond himself had activated. This allowed him to exit the building with the other staff members, thus he would avoid police suspicion. Another important clue is that in the pocket of the coat found under the false ceiling was a green ballpoint pen. This pen was later confirmed to be the same one Raymond used to sign various work logs on the day of the case. Additionally, witnesses observed Raymond meticulously scrubbing the lab floor in specific areas over the next few days, despite it appearing to be already clean. Furthermore, he disposed of all cleaning equipment, as well as a pack of tissues from the table with small brown stains resembling blood splatters. These items were later retrieved from a trash can, and forensic analysis confirmed that Raymond had made a thorough attempt to eliminate any traces of Annie's blood. In February 2011, Raymond agreed to a plea deal with the investigators. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would plead guilty. On March 17, 2011, at the next court hearing, he pleaded guilty to murder and attempted rape. He also expressed remorse and apologized to the parents and fiancé of Annie. However, Raymond never disclosed the details of what happened on the evening of the crime. He also refused to explain why he committed the act. As a result, Raymond J. Clark III received a 44 years prison sentence. He is currently serving his sentence at the Cheshire Correctional Institution in New Haven County, Connecticut, and is scheduled for release in September 2053. In an interview, the parents and fiancé of Annie stated that they consider the sentence fair, despite the fact that it will not bring back their daughter. The victim's mother, Vivian Vanlo, delivered a heartfelt speech during the sentencing. With tears in her eyes, she said that she would never be able to hug Annie again, can't hear her laugh, or have grandchildren again. Goodbye, Annie, the most precious gift God gave her. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Lauren Giddings. Lauren Teresa Giddings was born on April 18, 1984 in Tacoma Park, Maryland. She grew up with her two older sisters, Sarah and Caitlin. Her parents, Karen and William, maintained a warm and friendly atmosphere in the family. From a young age, she was always studious and religious. She was a member of St. Mary's Catholic Church and attended church from kindergarten through 8th grade. In 2002, at the age of 18, Lauren graduated from high school. That same year, she went to Georgia to attend an academy, where she studied until 2006. After leaving the academy, she returned home and worked at the National Public Policy Center in Washington. In 2008, she returned to Georgia to study law at Mercer University. Lauren was a blue-eyed, blonde with an athletic build who loved nature and animals, especially her pet dog, a Pekingese. Her relatives described her as a kind person who respected others' opinions. Sarah later noted that during college, Lauren transformed from a shy person into an active young woman with many friends. She was the pride of her family, and they had high hopes for her. However, her move to Georgia set off a series of unfortunate incidents that led to a tragic end. Mercer University is located in Macon, a city in central Georgia, right across from Lauren's dorm. Most of the people living in the dormitories are university students, and they usually know each other. Among them was Stephen Mark McDaniel, who lived near Lauren's room and was also in law school. Both are members of the Federalist Society, an organization of some 60,000 lawyers, both those studying and those already practicing. Lauren served as president of the society, while Stephen served as vice president. This was their only relationship. Stephen was known to be quiet. He was not very social and rarely drank. Lauren, on the other hand, was very attractive, had many interests, and maintained a busy schedule. Before they met at university, Stephen and Lauren had very different lives. Stephen was born on September 9, 1985, in Atlanta, Georgia. His parents, Glenda and William, worked in a factory. He was a bright child who valued cleanliness and organization. Until he was 13, he sang in the church choir in his hometown. Stephen aspired to write a novel, pursue a career in criminal law, and ultimately become a federal judge. After completing high school, he enrolled in law school in 2008, where he met Lauren. He had worked up the courage to ask her out a few times, but Lauren had kindly declined, explaining that she was dating David, a lawyer from Atlanta who was 20 years her senior. They started dating in 2007, before she went to college, when she interned at the law firm where he worked. After she moved to Georgia, David followed her, and their relationship continued. To discourage Stephen from pursuing her, Lauren mentioned that she and David planned to leave the city after graduation and live together. On May 11, 2011, Lauren fulfilled one of her biggest dreams, graduating with a Juris Doctorate. Her next goal was to obtain a license to practice as a lawyer, which required passing a challenging exam. As she prepared for the exam, everything went smoothly, and she felt confident about her future. However, she knew she would soon need to leave the city. Stephen silently accepted this fact. On the surface, he appeared calm, but in his mind, he had other plans. In June, Caitlin got married in Maryland, and Lauren attended the wedding. Soon after, she returned to her dormitory in Georgia to focus on studying for her upcoming exams. On the evening of June 25, David received an email from Lauren. In the email, she mentioned feeling uneasy and sensing that something strange was happening in her house. That reminded her of a similar experience she had over a year ago. At the time, she told her sister Caitlin that she suspected someone had broken into her home and gone through her belongings. At this point, Lauren's family and friends knew she was busy studying for exams, so they weren't worried when she stopped communicating. The last time anyone saw her was on Saturday, June 25, 2011, at a store. Caitlin sent her a few messages, but didn't think much about the lack of response. Caitlin believed she was too busy to respond. It wasn't until Wednesday evening, June 29, that David and her relatives began to worry because she had been silent for so long. David called Caitlin to ask if she had heard from Lauren, which worried her, as she had also tried to contact Lauren to no avail. She then contacted some of Lauren's friends, but no one had any information. Ashley, a friend of Lauren's, went to knock on her room, but no one answered, and it was quiet inside. Curious, she looked for Lauren's car and found it missing. The 2004 Mitsubishi was usually parked where Lauren always left it. Ashley remembered that Lauren had shown her where the spare key was in case of an emergency, so she used it to get into the apartment. Everything was in order. Lauren's personal belongings, phone, wallet, passport, and computer were in their usual places. Only Lauren was missing. While everyone was frantically searching for Lauren and trying to find clues about her whereabouts, Stephen entered the apartment. He stayed for a while to observe and chat with a few people before leaving. Ashley then discovered that Lauren's phone was dead, so she plugged it in to charge. Once the phone turned on, she checked it and saw that the last calls were made on June 25, 4 days earlier. Realizing it was time to involve the authorities, she called 911. A few minutes later, police officers from Mercer University arrived and relayed the information to the Macon police. After midnight, Police officers, along with Lauren's friends and neighbors, began searching for her. At 3 a.m., after a thorough check of the dormitory area, the police left without any news about Lauren. Caitlin became worried and decided to inform her parents. Her father quickly got in the car and drove to Macon to file a missing person report. After her father filed the report, the detectives began their investigation. They drove to the dormitory where Lauren lived but couldn't find a parking space, so they parked in front of a dumpster. When investigators entered Lauren's room, they used luminol, a chemical that can detect blood, to conduct a test. They sprayed luminol on the walls, floors, and some objects in Lauren's living room, kitchen, and bedroom. However, things took a turn for the worse when they entered the bathroom and found the floor reacting violently to the luminol. At this point, everyone realized this was a crime scene and that something terrible had happened to Lauren. Meanwhile, friends and family continued to search for her. When interviewing Stephen, he described Lauren as a good and honest person, but admitted that he did not know where she was. According to Stephen, she had gone jogging and was attacked by a criminal. At the time he was sharing this, a garbage truck arrived. However, they were unable to collect the trash because a police car had parked in the wrong place and blocked the entrance to the trash bin. This was a pivotal moment that helped investigators quickly uncover the truth about what had happened to Lauren. Several detectives, having found nothing in Lauren's apartment and returning to their car, suddenly sensed a foul odor. It was the smell of death. They traced the odor to the garbage containers and began to investigate them. Inside one black plastic bag, they discovered a decomposing human torso. After examining it, the detectives concluded that it was likely the remains of a female, probably belonging to Lauren. While Stephen was talking to a reporter, a press officer interrupted to announce that the police had just discovered a body in a trash can behind the house. Initially confused and silent for a few seconds, Stephen then asked again about the body. He stammered that he needed to sit down, turned away from the camera, walked a short distance, and sat down near some bushes. Throughout this, the media operator captured his reactions. He appeared pale and was visibly shaking. Then, on the night of June 30, Stephen voluntarily went to the police station to provide a statement. The questioning lasted for 12 long hours. When asked about Lauren, he said he always noticed when she left or entered the dormitory. Even though he did not speak to her directly, he could hear or see her passing by his window. Furthermore, he claimed that he was always aware of all the activities in the dormitory. After being questioned, Stephen allowed the police to search his home, including his bedroom, where they discovered a rope, several weapons, blood-stained blue gloves, a master key to open the apartment door, and a pair of women's underwear. The investigators also seized Stephen's car, where they found more bloodstains. They found his computer, which contained conversations on a blog under the alias Sun. In this blog, he wrote about women and violence. In another post, Stephen discussed a situation that seemed to involve Lauren. He mentioned that he had been consumed by thoughts of one person for a long time, someone he wanted to protect from harm. If given the chance, he would have fought against anything that could hurt her without hesitation, but his mental struggles prevented him from doing so. He couldn't even confess his feelings to her, leaving him to watch her from afar. On Stephen's computer, many compromising photos were discovered, including pictures of Lauren. Additionally, a hacksaw with bloodstains was found in the tool cabinet, suggesting that a disturbing situation had occurred. Detectives concluded that Stephen had committed a heinous crime against Lauren. The evidence collected was sufficient to officially arrest Stephen McDaniel on July 2, 2011. On July 6, DNA tests showed that body parts found in a trash can belonged to Lauren. In August 2011, Stephen was charged with murder. Police thoroughly searched the dormitory and surrounding areas for other body parts, but found nothing more. Despite overwhelming evidence, he maintained his innocence during the early stages of his detention. After examining the contents of Stephen's computer, investigators discovered that he had been monitoring Lauren's accounts and social media. In addition to the murder charge, on August 23, 2011, Stephen was charged with 7 more counts and was ordered to post bail of $850,000, a huge amount of money for him and his family. In February 2013, the prosecutor's office announced that they would not seek the death penalty, at the request of Lauren's family. In 2014, just a week before his trial, Stephen surprised everyone by pleading guilty. The decision to plead guilty was part of a deal with prosecutors, in which he agreed to accept responsibility for Lauren's death in exchange for dropping several other charges against him. Nearly 3 years after her murder, he recounted what really happened. Stephen said that on the morning of June 26, 2011, he entered Lauren's apartment while she was sleeping. He sat on her bed to watch her. When she woke up and saw him, she tried to stay calm and pleaded with him not to hurt her. Instead of leaving, he grabbed Lauren by the neck and squeezed tightly. She fought back desperately to escape. They both fell to the floor, and her legs got trapped under the bed, which worked to Stephen's advantage since she couldn't kick him. However, she managed to hit him with her hands and pulled off his mask. Fear engulfed her when she realized the attacker was her neighbor, Stephen, a fellow law student and vice president of the same organization she led. Once a shy and reserved guy who had asked her out, he had transformed into a terrifying figure. He violently grabbed her by the neck in an attempt to strangle her. Despite Lauren's desperate pleas for him to stop, he ignored her cries and continued to tighten his grip for several minutes. When she fell still, he released her at 4:30. Stephen then dragged Lauren's body into the bathroom, placed her in the bathtub, and returned to his apartment. There, he spent the day on his computer. He eventually returned to Lauren's apartment with a hacksaw. Without hesitation, he began wrapping the body parts in black bags and throwing them into various trash cans around the dormitory. He kept her torso for 2 more days before dumping it in a container outside the building, where police later discovered it. Stephen reported that within 48 hours of the crime, he had disposed of the mask and shirt stained with Lauren's blood. When questioned about the motive for the murder, he confessed to being obsessed with Lauren since they met. He revealed that he had been spying on her for months, using a setup to observe her without her noticing. Stephen also admitted that he had carefully researched methods to avoid detection. Thanks to this, he was able to use the master key he had stolen from the dormitory manager to enter Lauren's room. She was about to become a lawyer, something she had always dreamed of throughout her life. However, she had no idea that Stephen, who had been secretly watching her, would completely transform her life. After a trial in 2014, Stephen Mark McDaniel was convicted of a violent crime and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole. After receiving the verdict, he began to do everything he could to regain his freedom. Despite admitting guilt, he maintained that he did not abuse Lauren. Stephen also shared with investigators his irrational belief that Lauren was still alive. He claimed to have a split personality, which he said made it difficult for him to explain his actions, yet he continued to follow his daily routine. He expressed feelings of remorse and stated that he missed Lauren greatly, but he understood that he could not expect forgiveness from her family. In 2018, Stephen's father set up an online fundraising page to hire a lawyer for his son's defense. However, the campaign was met with strong opposition from Lauren's family and friends, leading to its immediate cancellation. As a result, Stephen was forced to represent himself at the hearing. He argued that his rights were violated in the original sentence. Additionally, he criticized his previous lawyers for not defending him adequately, but his request for a review was denied. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Georgia and then to the Supreme Court of the United States, but both appeals were rejected. In January 2022, as well as in May and December of that year, He attempted to have his trial reviewed, but was unsuccessful. In January 2023, nearly 9 years after pleading guilty, he filed another appeal seeking to reduce his parole eligibility period. This time, he submitted a petition to the federal district court. But, as before, his appeal was denied. Stephen's mother struggled to accept the painful reality of her son's involvement in the murder. His grandfather expressed deep sadness, reflecting on the 25 years during which he had been proud of his grandson, but now found it hard to recognize him. During a visit to the facility where Stephen was held, the grandfather felt as if he were seeing a different person. Overwhelmed with despair, he left and chose not to visit Stephen again. Lauren's relatives found some comfort in the belief that Stephen would eventually realize the significance of his actions during his time in prison, which might lead to his repentance. Caitlin, her sister, honored Lauren by naming one of her daughters after her. The family continues to celebrate Lauren's birthday and maintains a tradition of wearing pink clothes on Wednesdays, just as Lauren had during her life. Lauren's tragic fate is a reminder of the importance of staying vigilant when sensing danger. In Lauren's case, the threat was not only visible, but also close at hand, as she fell victim to someone who appeared harmless. This incident not only destroyed her dreams, but also broke the hearts of her loved ones. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another horrible case. The case of Rachel Moran. Rachel Moran was born in Ireland in 1982, when she was only 6 months old. Her family moved to Hull, Humberside, UK. She is the youngest of 4 children, and was known to be well-behaved and studious from a young age. Rachel is passionate about music and dance, especially ballet. She often spends time with her family, although she has many friends. After graduating from high school, Rachel decided to go to medical school and start building her career. During this time, she met a younger man named Mark, and they quickly began dating. They soon decided to move in together, but Rachel requested that they live close to her family home so she could visit often. They found an apartment just a few miles away from her family home and rented it. At the age of 21, Rachel used her talent to join a dance group to earn extra income. She also worked part-time as a kindergarten teacher. One of her dreams was to become a chef, so she started baking to develop her cooking skills. At the end of 2002, she decided to further her education by enrolling in cooking courses that would help her achieve her dream. Her studies began in January 2003. During this time, Rachel was dating Mark. They considered marriage and having children but felt it was too soon. They wanted to focus on their education and careers first. On Tuesday, December 31, 2002, people across Great Britain were getting ready to celebrate the new year, including Rachel and her boyfriend. Mark suggested they go to a bar with friends on New Year's Eve, but Rachel preferred to stay with her family. Mark didn't want to join her, so they agreed that he would stay home to look after the 2 kittens they had just adopted. Rachel then went to her parents' house in North Hall Hold and spent New Year's Eve with her family. On New Year's Eve, Rachel called Mark to wish him a Happy New Year, but he didn't answer his home phone. She then tried calling his cell phone, but a close friend answered. There was loud music and partying in the background. The friend explained that he and Mark had gone to a party at home. Rachel was upset because this meant their kittens were home alone. Soon after, Mark's phone battery died. She wanted him to come back and look after the kittens, but since she couldn't reach him, she decided to go check on them herself. Her mother Wanda saw her leave and became worried, not wanting her to be alone at such a late hour, especially in bad weather and with people drinking on the street. Rachel convinced her mother to let her go out, promising to call Wanda in about 20 minutes when Rachel got back to the apartment. Her mother waited for the call, but when the 20 minutes had passed, she began to worry. First, she tried Rachel's cell phone, but it was turned off. Next, she called the home phone, but no one answered. Thinking that Rachel might have gone to find Mark, the Wanda managed to calm herself for a bit. However, as time went on, over 2 hours passed since Rachel had left home, and there was still no news. This was unusual for Rachel. The Wanda was increasingly anxious and jumped in surprise when the home phone rang. Unfortunately, it was her other daughter calling to wish her a happy new year. The Wanda shared her concerns, and they all tried calling Rachel again, but her mobile phone remained silent. When they called the home phone again, they noticed the line was busy. This was a small relief, as it indicated that someone was using the phone, suggesting Rachel had returned home safely. 5 minutes later, Rachel's mother called her back. Mark answered the phone and explained that he had been out all night. He had just returned to the apartment and was getting ready for bed after calling a friend. He had no idea that Rachel had returned to their home. Rachel was not at the apartment, and Mark did not notice anything unusual in the apartment, except that the kittens were very hungry, which indicated that Rachel had not returned to feed them. This made Wanda extremely worried, and she feared that something terrible had happened to her daughter. Rachel's family quickly went to the apartment and confirmed Mark's story. Worried, they immediately went to the local police station to report Rachel missing. Police asked her family if this had ever happened before, but the Wanda was adamant that Rachel had never run away from home before, and that she did not have any mental health issues. She had kept away from people who could cause her trouble, so there was no reason for her to run away. After speaking with family members, the police recognized the seriousness of the case. Over 10 police officers joined the search operation, thoroughly examining every location along the route the Rachel was expected to take that night, yet they still had no leads on what had happened. Police spoke with the last people who saw Rachel, including her mother and brother. The Wanda recalled a man who had passed by them as she stood at the door trying to convince Rachel not to go out so late. The man was walking in the same direction as Rachel, which led police to search for clues about a man while continuing to search for Rachel. The police interviewed Mark. They believed that on the night of Rachel's disappearance, there may have been a disagreement between them because Mark left the kitten home alone and went to a party without her. However, Mark denied this, saying that he did not see Rachel that night, and that they did not have an argument. Although he believed that Rachel may have been upset, he insisted that he was not home on New Year's Eve and had been with friends the entire time. Mark was extremely worried about Rachel's disappearance and felt guilty for leaving the house, fearing that it would put her in danger. Mark still actively helped to search for her. His actions did not arouse any suspicion, and after verifying his alibi, all suspicions against him were cleared. After the police checked with people Rachel might have known, they did not find any suspicious people who could have staged the kidnapping or attack. Her friends were known to be trustworthy. Therefore, the police concluded that she had been kidnapped or attacked by someone she did not know well. After several days, the police did not see any activity on Rachel's bank cards and noticed that she had not used her mobile phone. A search of Rachel and Mark's apartment also yielded no clues. At the beginning of the investigation, police reviewed footage from city surveillance cameras to determine what happened on New Year's Eve. During the search, they analyzed the recordings and were able to track Rachel as she walked toward her apartment. This helped them pinpoint a specific area that was the route she may have been attacked. With this information, the search efforts focused on a smaller area. They deployed helicopters, dogs, mounted police, and a team of divers. This was a difficult time for Rachel's family, who still held out hope that she was alive. However, the actions of the search team showed that they were more focused on finding a body than a living person. On January 1, 2003, a dive team began searching a canal known for dumping waste. They discovered sneakers similar to the ones Rachel had worn at her mother's house. This prompted a more extensive search of the site. The divers discovered a woman's handbag. Inside the bag, they found Rachel's cell phone, a cosmetic case, and an Irish passport that belonged to her. The police believed that the objects found were intentionally discarded, indicating that someone wanted to ensure they would never be discovered. This led them to conclude that Rachel was likely no longer alive. Their suspicions were reinforced by the total lack of communication from the suspected kidnappers. No ransom had been requested, and they had not provided any information about Rachel to her parents. With very little information available, the police decided to retrace Rachel's last known movements. At the same time, they gathered details to share with journalists in hopes of generating public interest in the case. They provided thorough descriptions of Rachel's clothing, her photographs, and the route she was last seen taking, including the exact time and her home address. They hoped this would help attract the attention of anyone who might have noticed something unusual, especially in relation to the man described by Rachel's mother. Some of the witnesses at the police station on New Year's Eve were unfortunately intoxicated, which clouded their memories and made them unreliable, hampering the investigation. Meanwhile, the police had access to new surveillance cameras, one of which was located on a school building, just outside Rachel's usual route. The footage showed a silhouette resembling Rachel, placing her less than 200 meters from her apartment. Furthermore, she had changed her usual route. Instead of taking the well-lit central streets, she turned into the dark side streets of a nearby residential area. Then, in the video, a second figure suddenly appears and quickly approaches Rachel from behind. The footage does not show what happened when they met. It is possible that this figure was the criminal who attacked her. The police knew that murder victims were usually found within a few kilometers of the scene of the attack. Therefore, they decided to expand the search area to a 3-kilometer radius from Rachel's house. The search involved over 100 police officers, making it one of the largest operations ever conducted by the Humber Police. Every street was thoroughly searched, but no evidence was found. A crucial decision was made. The team would not only search the area, but also search homes within a 3-kilometer radius. Although the chances of finding Rachel alive were very low, on January 28, 2003, more than 100 police officers set out to search for Rachel. They formed small search teams. A few hours later, a member of a search team contacted the station to report that they had found a man's house just a short distance from Rachel's apartment. When the police checked the house, there was a man who claimed that he lived there with a friend. Their house was very dirty and untidy, and it seemed like he never cleaned it, because there was a foul smell inside. Initially, there was no sign of Rachel, but the police noticed a large wardrobe. When they asked the tenant for the key, he said that he had lost it. He then changed his story, saying that he had given the key to an old friend who used to live with him. After a while, his story changed again, and he said that he had given the key to his mother. The police found this strange. Why didn't the owner of the wardrobe have the key? It seemed like a lie and aroused suspicion. Finally, the police asked him to find the key. When the closet door was opened, a large amount of rubbish was removed, including carpets, boxes, bags, and other debris. After 4 weeks of searching, the mystery of Rachel Marin's disappearance was solved when her decomposing body was found in the closet, wrapped in bin bags. The apartment where her body was discovered was only 100 meters from her home. 2 young men who lived there were quickly arrested on suspicion of murder. One of them, 20-year-old Michael Little, was living as a homeless person, while his friend immediately denied any involvement, claiming that he had not used the apartment for a long time. He insisted that he had no idea there was a body there. His claim was backed up by the fact that he had moved to another location a long time ago and had never been to the apartment. Then attention turned to Michael Little. During the investigation, police discovered a suspicious notebook containing some disturbing notes, but his notes lacked specific details about any actual wrongdoing. Michael, the murder suspect, claimed that he saw Rachel walking alone at night and invited her to his house for a drink. Rachel was his neighbor, and they were friends. According to Michael, Rachel accepted his invitation. After they entered the house, Rachel and Michael drank and talked for a while, and then an argument broke out. Michael admitted that he tried to calm things down by leaving the room and leaving Rachel in the kitchen. However, when he returned, he saw her holding a knife, and she stabbed him with it. To prove this, he showed a long-healed scar on his hand. Frightened, Michael attacked Rachel, took the knife from her, and in a fit of rage killed her. He claimed that it was self-defense, but this argument seems unconvincing since his wound was much older. Police interviewed people close to Michael. Several witnesses revealed that he attended a party with friends that night, where he talked about confessing his love to a blonde girl he had feelings for. Most did not know who she was, but believed she likely rejected him. Michael left the party around midnight and said he went home. The police then traced Michael's route, which matched the area where Rachel had been walking. They also gathered a description of the clothes he was wearing that night, which matched the appearance of a stranger seen on surveillance footage running toward Rachel before she was murdered. Rachel's family believes that she could not have acted as Michael described. First, Rachel would never have gone to a stranger's house to drink. Second, she was desperate to get home to her kittens and would not have wasted time visiting someone she did not know. Rachel also did not drink, and most importantly, she would never have used a knife in a domestic dispute. Her family believes that Michael was lying. The police needed to establish that Michael's communication with Rachel was not voluntary. They had to prove he had either lured her or forced her to his apartment. To gather evidence, the police continued reviewing footage from the city's CCTV cameras. They had previously found a clip showing Michael walking in front of Rachel, but other videos revealed him approaching her from behind. This suggested that he had spotted her and may have hidden to ambush her, which supported the suspicion of kidnapping. Meanwhile, the autopsy results were in. The forensic expert determined that Rachel had suffered a brutal attack, with 27 stab wounds, primarily on the back of her head and neck. A large kitchen knife was used in the assault. She was likely attacked from behind, as there were no signs of defensive wounds on her arms or body. In Michael's apartment, police found the Rachel's blood, and dirt on her legs suggested she had been dragged through the grass. This pointed to the conclusion that the attack occurred on the street. He likely attacked Rachel and took her to his apartment. The autopsy revealed evidence of abuse. Despite the clear evidence of abuse, the prosecutor's office chose not to charge Michael with that crime. Instead, they charged him with premeditated murder. Michael often spent time by the window and had few friends. He watched Rachel every day as she passed by his house on her way to her parents' house. All of Michael's friends knew about his unusual fantasies and unhealthy obsession with Rachel, whom he constantly watched. According to Michael's friends, he would spend hours looking at her from the window and often mentioned her in conversation. Michael claimed to have a girlfriend, but everyone knew this was a lie. His imaginary girlfriend resembled Rachel in many ways. While he was in prison, his story changed again. He said that Rachel approached him on the street, asking him to walk with her to his house because she was afraid of getting into trouble. When they got to his apartment, they argued. She allegedly tried to attack him, prompting Michael to hit her on the back of the head. He then lost control and, fearing for his life, stabbed her to death. The story contradicted the evidence police had gathered. There was no reason to believe that Rachel, who barely knew him, would approach him or act aggressively. Police learned about Michael Little's personality. He was a troubled teenager who faced bullying at school. Overweight and socially isolated, he endured ridicule that had a profound effect on him. With virtually no friends, he interacted mainly with his younger sister, which also made him a target for ridicule. His father had abandoned the family, and Michael revealed that he had been abused by his stepfather throughout his childhood. The only people he had a good relationship with were his mother and sister. Michael grew up in several public housing apartments. Neighbors saw Michael spend most of his time at home using illegal drugs and frequently watching adult films. One of his classmates noted that when Michael was angry, he became aggressive and unpredictable, revealing his darker side, which often led to trouble. On January 31, 2003, 3-year-old Michael Little was charged with first-degree murder. He claimed that he acted in self-defense. He accused Mark Fuller, who had previously lived in the same house with him, of murder, although Fuller had previously been cleared of all suspicion. Michael claimed that Fuller's alleged motive was jealousy. He was angry that Rachel had taken a liking to Michael. Michael explained that his earlier confession to the murder was the result of threats from Fuller, who had threatened to kill him and his family if he did not confess. In court, Michael also claimed that he had been forced to clean up the blood and hide the body. This information needed to be verified. Fuller then underwent another round of questioning, during which he continued to maintain his innocence in Rachel's death. The police reviewed the evidence and confirmed that Fuller had an alibi. As a result, they were once again unable to charge him. Michael was trying to shift the blame to someone else. His lies ultimately strengthened the prosecution's case. The injuries on Rachel did not match the description he had given, in which he had always claimed that he was the victim of Rachel's attack. After both the prosecution and defense presented their cases, the jury deliberated for 9 hours. The jury then found Michael Little guilty of first-degree murder. A jury later found Michael Little guilty of first-degree murder. Michael was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. After Rachel's death, Ray Moran. Her father fell into a deep depression, while her mother began to suffer from health problems. Rachel's relatives believed that Michael had no remorse for his actions, as he tried to blame others for his crimes. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Jessica Paget. Jessica was born on December 15, 1980, in Pennsylvania, where she spent her entire life. As a child, she was energetic and cheerful. However, her parents, Thomas and Danelle, divorced when she was young. Her mother later remarried, and Jessica formed a close bond with her stepfather, whom she considered her second father. After graduating from high school in 1998, Jessica attended college to study preschool education. It was during this time that she met her future husband, Michael Paget. They began dating, moved in together, and had 2 children over the course of their 8-year relationship. Although they didn't get married until August 2014, Michael was a caring father and husband. However, like any family, they experienced ups and downs in their relationship. Jessica was happy with Michael, but just 4 months after their wedding, she vanished. Before her disappearance, Jessica worked at a kindergarten in Northampton for 2 years. She loved her job, as she was passionate about working with children and had a natural ability to connect with them. The children adored her, and she enjoyed spending time with them. On November 21, 2014, Jessica dropped off her older children at school and then headed to work with her younger son, who attended the same kindergarten. It was a typical day, with no indication of the trouble that was to come. Jessica asked her administrator if she could take a short break from work to send a fax to her mother's house in a rural area near Northampton. The administrator agreed, and Jessica left her son at kindergarten before driving to her mother's house. She was expected to return to work within 30 minutes, but an hour passed and she didn't come back. Her colleagues tried calling her, but she didn't answer. When Jessica failed to return, the kindergarten administrator contacted her husband, Michael, to ask if he knew where she was. Michael said he was at work and hadn't heard from her. He tried calling her, but all his calls went straight to voicemail, which was unusual for Jessica as she always answered calls from her family. Michael then called his mother-in-law, Danelle, who was in Florida, to see if Jessica had contacted her. However, Danelle hadn't heard from her daughter all day and was immediately worried. She suggested that Michael call her husband, Greg, who was Jessica's stepfather, to see if he had any information. However, Greg reported that he hadn't seen or spoken to Jessica that day. As the minutes ticked by, Jessica's relatives grew increasingly worried. After numerous failed attempts to contact her, Danelle took a flight to Pennsylvania to search for her daughter. Meanwhile, for hours after Jessica disappeared from work, her husband Michael reported her missing to the police. He expressed his concern that Jessica would never leave their children voluntarily, leading him to fear the worst. The police promptly launched an investigation, distributing Jessica's description to all nearby stations. She was described as 5 feet 4 inches tall, weighing 130 pounds, with a footprint tattoo on her shoulder, brown hair, and hazel eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing gray sweatpants and a black hoodie with the words "Duck, Duck, Goose" on the front and "Staff" on the back. A thorough search of local hospitals and morgues yielded no results. Detectives worked to determine Jessica's whereabouts, interviewing her co-workers in the process. However, everyone they spoke to reported that Jessica had no enemies and was well liked by her colleagues, children, and their parents. According to her co-workers, Jessica seemed fine when she left work at lunchtime, and they noticed nothing unusual about her behavior. 2 hours after Michael reported his wife Jessica missing, the police were able to locate her phone signal, which indicated that it was approximately 1 mile from the kindergarten where she worked. Although the data was not entirely accurate due to inherent location determination errors, it provided a general area for the police to focus their search. However, by the time they began searching, it was already nighttime. The police found Jessica's car, a white Subaru Outback, in a nearby parking lot. The vehicle was unlocked and empty, with her purse, documents, and bank cards still inside. The keys were in the ignition, and her phone was on the passenger seat next to her purse. There were no signs of a crime in the car, leaving the police with several unanswered questions. Where was Jessica, and what had caused her to abandon her car and valuables so close to her workplace? To answer these questions, the police sought CCTV footage. A camera on the back wall of a store across the street had captured the area where Jessica's car was found. After reviewing the footage with the store manager, the police saw Jessica driving into the parking lot at around 1 p.m. She got out of the car and stood by the driver's door for a short time before leaving and not returning. The investigators were baffled by Jessica's disappearance, as she had left behind her documents, phone, and keys. It was unclear whether she had intentionally gone into hiding. Surveillance footage showed Jessica walking between 2 buildings towards another parking lot, where she vanished from view due to the lack of cameras. To get a better look at the footage, the investigators made a copy of the video to review on a larger screen at the police station. The Northampton Police Department, being a small force, enlisted the help of the Pennsylvania State Police to coordinate a search effort. Flyers with Jessica's photo were distributed throughout Northampton and surrounding cities, as well as shared on social media and through local news outlets. State police detectives began reconstructing the events leading up to Jessica's disappearance. They started by re-interviewing the kindergarten staff, who revealed that Jessica had left work to send a fax from her mother's house. The detectives then visited the house, which was approximately 4 miles from the kindergarten, in search of answers. The detectives met with Danelle and her husband Greg at the scene, and learned that Jessica had keys to their home and could visit at any time. On the day of her disappearance, both Danelle and Greg had been out, Danelle in Florida and Greg elsewhere, which left uncertainty about Jessica's activities at the house. They also checked Greg's fax machine for records of usage, but found that the device was faulty, which didn't provide any clear information. Jessica might have used another fax machine, but it still didn't explain why she had left her belongings in her car. The detectives decided to speak with Jessica's husband Michael, as husbands are often suspects in such cases. To confirm Michael's story that he was the first to leave the house on the day Jessica disappeared, detectives investigated his claim. It was a possibility they couldn't rule out, as statistically, a significant number of disappearances involve a partner. As they continued the investigation, the police arranged a search party, and local media alerted the public about Jessica's disappearance. Anyone with information was asked to come forward. By this point, 48 hours had passed, but no new leads emerged on Jessica's journey to her mother's house. To aid in their investigation, detectives scoured the route to her mother's house for surveillance cameras. One key location, an Exxon gas station adjacent to the main road leading to the mother's residence, had multiple cameras installed. Given the fact that this gas station was strategically situated on Jessica's stated route, the police logically inferred that if Jessica drove in the direction she said, she would be captured on camera. A review of the recording showed that her car was, indeed, captured driving by at approximately 12:56 p.m. From there, the journey to her mother's house took just a few minutes, suggesting Jessica would need to make the short trip back in order to utilize a functional fax machine, which wasn't operational at her mother's home. While fast-forwarding the tape to find a shot of the vehicle's potential return, detectives made a perplexing observation. The footage shows Jessica's white car speeding through a gas station just 14 minutes later. Notably, the car took a peculiar route, turning towards the gas station and continuing onto the other side without stopping, before heading towards the city center, where the car was later abandoned in a parking lot. Given her rapid pace, the likely reason for this unusual detour was a red traffic light at the intersection, which Jessica may have attempted to avoid by cutting through the gas station. From there, she drove onto a different road where the light was green and eventually left her car in the parking lot, where a police officer discovered it later. However, a surprising detail emerged upon closer inspection of the footage. Jessica, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall and 130 pounds, appeared to be much shorter and lighter than the person seen exiting her car. Measuring against the known height of the car, experts estimated that this person stood between 5 feet 11 inches and 6 feet 3 inches tall. Moreover, during their examination of the abandoned car, the police noticed that the driver's seat was pushed forward, which would make it uncomfortable for someone taller than 5 feet 11 inches to operate the vehicle comfortably. The police initially found it suspicious that the driver's seat was positioned for someone of Jessica's height. However, after reviewing the footage, they discovered that the person who got out of the car had adjusted the seat to its most forward position, attempting to make it seem like Jessica was driving. But this raised another question: who was the tall person seen in the footage? Michael, he stood at around 6 feet tall. The police brought him in for questioning, and he denied any involvement in his wife's disappearance, claiming he was at work when the kindergarten staff called him. Detectives verified his alibi by interviewing his colleagues and tracking the geolocation of his phone on the day of Jessica's disappearance. The evidence confirmed that Michael was indeed at work at the time, which meant the person in the footage was not him. For days had passed since Jessica's disappearance, and her children were struggling to cope with the stress and uncertainty. Despite the ongoing search efforts, no leads had been found. Investigators re-examined the footage of someone exiting Jessica's car, but the person's identity remained a mystery. However, upon closer inspection, the officers noticed a detail they had previously missed. A minute after the unknown person disappeared from view, a white SUV, likely a Ford, left the scene. This new information led the police to Greg, Jessica's stepfather, who matched the suspect's height description and owned a similar vehicle. The police requested that Greg come to the station for questioning, leaving him shocked and dismayed to be considered a suspect in his stepdaughter's disappearance. Greg claimed that he had left his car at a service center for repairs and that a neighbor had given him a ride there to pick it up. He then stated that he had stopped at an Exxon gas station to grab a bite to eat. However, the police obtained CCTV footage from the gas station, which showed Greg driving past the station just 2 minutes after leaving the service center. It turned out that Greg had lied about stopping at the gas station. Further investigation revealed that Greg's entire story was fabricated. His neighbor denied driving him to the service center, contradicting Greg's claim. This led detectives to suspect that Greg might have been involved in Jessica's disappearance. By piecing together the evidence, investigators concluded that Greg was likely at home when Jessica arrived. It's possible that something happened, and Greg drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center. The police searched Greg's house, where they found evidence that contradicted his alibi. The fax machine, which Greg claimed was not working, was found to be functional, and its usage history showed that Jessica had indeed sent a fax from the house on the day of her disappearance. Furthermore, a trash can in the basement contained napkins with bloodstains, and Greg's shoes, which were found in a dumpster on the street, had dried blood on them. Donnell reported to the police that Greg had requested an early trash pickup the day before, which seemed unusual at the time, especially since the trash can wasn't full. In hindsight, this could be how Greg disposed of evidence related to cleaning products and rags used in the house. During a second interrogation, the police confronted Greg, stating that they knew his previous statements were false and that they had found evidence in his home. They also informed him that they were aware Jessica had been at his house on the day she disappeared. Greg then began to talk. Greg claimed that when he returned home on the afternoon of November 21st, he found Jessica's car in the driveway and bloodstains on the carpet. He alleged that Jessica was already dead when he arrived and that he panicked, fearing no one would believe him. He supposedly drove Jessica's car to a city center parking lot and then returned home. Greg also stated that Jessica had outstanding debts, which he claimed led to her death. However, detectives later discovered that this was another lie, and they found evidence that Greg had purchased adult toys the day before Jessica disappeared. The investigators were fed up with Greg's inconsistent stories, so they directly asked him where he had hidden his stepdaughter Jessica's body, explaining that an autopsy would provide answers to many questions. Realizing he was caught, Greg changed his story again. This time, he claimed he was at home watching adult videos when Jessica arrived and asked to send a fax. According to Greg, he was standing behind her as she used the computer, and he became aroused and developed a desire for his stepdaughter. Without saying a word, he allegedly pulled out a gun and shot her in the back of the head. Then, he moved Jessica's body to the bedroom. Greg then drove Jessica's car to a parking lot in the city center, where he had previously left his Ford for repairs. To mislead investigators, he adjusted the seat to make it appear as though Jessica was driving. What Greg said next shocked the investigators. After returning home, he set up a video camera near the bed and recorded a video of himself with Jessica's body. The police later found this disturbing video on Greg's computer. Greg confessed to wrapping his stepdaughter Jessica's body in a blanket and hiding it in a ravine near his home. He claimed he was not a bad person, but had lost control. After the crime, Greg's life fell apart. He lost his business, home, dogs, and wife. However, he never mentioned the loss of Jessica. Jessica's mother, Donnell, was shocked to discover that her daughter was dead and that her husband was responsible. The authorities announced Jessica's death, stating that she was a victim of homicide. The district attorney, John Morganelli, expressed skepticism about Greg's version of events, but believed there was a sexual motive behind the crime. The prosecutor's office examined the evidence to determine if Greg had planned the attack. Jessica's family released a statement thanking law enforcement, the media, and the public for their efforts. They described Jessica as a beautiful and vibrant young woman who was loved by her family and friends, and stated that her loss made the world a darker place. Gregory Gregg, 53, was charged with the murder of Jessica Padette. Initially, investigators suspected that Greg had tried to persuade Jessica into a romantic encounter, but when she refused, he killed her to avoid exposure. However, this theory was difficult to prove due to the lack of defensive wounds on Jessica's body. She died from a single wound to the back of her head, which corroborated Greg's testimony. Under Pennsylvania law, Greg could have faced the death penalty, but since Jessica was already dead when he committed the second part of the crime, the prosecution could not pursue the death penalty. An examination of Greg and Jessica's computers and phones revealed no evidence of a relationship beyond that of stepfather and stepdaughter. The trial began in 2015. District Attorney John Morganelli noted that Greg's lawyer, John McMahon Jr., failed to submit the results of a mental health evaluation for Greg. McMahon claimed that he had Greg evaluated for a possible insanity defense, but the evaluation found that Greg did not have a diminished mental capacity, so McMahon did not use it in the trial. During the trial, the jury was forced to watch a disturbing 6-minute video that Greg had recorded, which showed him committing heinous crimes using adult toys he had purchased the day before. The jury was reluctant to view the video, but the judge ruled that they were obligated to watch it before reaching a verdict. Greg's lawyer argued that the crime was not premeditated and that his client should be charged with a third-degree crime rather than a first-degree crime. In response, Northampton County District Attorney John Morganelli presented the video as evidence to prove that the crime was, in fact, premeditated. Morganelli explained that this was necessary to convince the jurors of Greg's guilt, despite the disturbing nature of the footage. The jury delivered a unanimous verdict in just 6 minutes, finding Greg guilty of taking Jessica's life and desecrating her body. As a result, the court sentenced him to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. When asked by the judge if he had any final words, Greg simply replied, "No, sir. I'm just very sorry." Following the sentencing, the judge advised the jurors to seek counseling from a psychologist to cope with the traumatic case. Jessica's husband, Michael, spoke to reporters, expressing the difficulty of moving on without his beloved wife and raising their 3 children alone. He described Jessica as the most wonderful person he had ever met. In a separate matter, Danelle, Greg's wife, has initiated divorce proceedings. However, the process is proving to be complex and Greg is hindering her efforts. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of James Patrick Bulger. John Venables was born on 13 August 1982 in Kirby, a town in the northeast of England, 10 kilometers from Liverpool. He has 2 older brothers. His parents often separated and reconciled, and his mother often shouted at him. At school, John was bullied, which led to him transferring to another school. At his new school, John befriended a boy named Robert Thompson. Robert was born on August 23, 1982, and came from a troubled family in Kirby. His father left when he was only 2 years old, leaving his mother to care for 7 children on her own. Afterward, she had another child with a new partner, but the departure of her husband deeply affected her. As a result, she struggled with depression and turned to heavy drinking. Robert often argued with his brothers, but had a special bond with his younger brother Ryan. Robert had a keen interest in collecting toy trolls. As John and Robert became friends, they discovered that they had similar interests. They often spent time together skipping school and shoplifting. On the morning of February 12, 1993, they met on the street. Instead of going to school, they hid their backpacks and went to the Trend Mall, which was known as one of the most dangerous areas in the city. That day, John and Robert stole batteries, construction paint, and a toy demon from the mall. As they talked, they came up with a disturbing idea. They said, "Let's find a child." It's unclear who first suggested it, but once they agreed, they followed through with the plan. Almost 3 years ago, on March 16, 1990, James Patrick Bulger was born. He was the only child of Denise Bulger and Ralph Stephen Bulger. They had lost a child during pregnancy in their 20s, so when James was born, they took great care of him. He was a smiling baby, and Denise made sure he was never far from her. On Friday, February 12, 1993, it was just over a month before James's third birthday. Denise's brother, Nicole, invited her to the mall that day, and Denise agreed, taking James with her. They arrived at the mall that afternoon. First, they waited outside a clothing store while Denise tried on some clothes. For a brief moment, she lost sight of James, and when she quickly searched for him, she found him alone and crying. After leaving the clothing store, they went to the butcher's shop. Along the way, they stopped frequently because James wanted to play. At one store, James made a mess in the children's clothing section, and at another, he took some candy. When they arrived at the butcher shop, Denise thought it would be okay to leave James outside for a while. She believed that buying meat would be quick and that he was tired from walking with her. However, buying meat took longer than she expected. When Denise finally got outside, she realized that she had lost track of her son again. She had just seen James playing with a cigarette butt, but then he disappeared from sight. This time, there was no crying to help her locate James. Meanwhile, while Denise was inside, Robert and John were wandering around the mall, looking for a child to kidnap. Their motive for doing so remains unknown. John and Robert then noticed little James, wearing a blue jacket and eating caramels by himself in front of the butcher shop. John walked up to James and said, "Come on, honey." James responded and walked over. John then took the boy's hand. Occasionally, James would run ahead of the boys, but they kept close to him the entire time. The three then left the mall. This happened at 3:42 p.m., just before Denise came out of the store and realized her son was missing. Denise quickly began searching for James in the security office, describing the boy and calling his name over the loudspeaker, but there was no response. A missing persons report was filed with the police only after they had checked all the stores in the mall. Meanwhile, the three children were walking near the mall. The Liverpool Canal runs alongside the mall, and the boys wandered along the banks of the canal, reaching a deserted area. There, John and Robert joked about pushing James into the water. They tried to bring the boy closer to the water's edge so he would slip, but James didn't fall. John then picked James up and threw him to the ground, causing him to hit his head on the ground and injure. The ground was covered in blood, and the two boys, Robert and John, decided to run away, leaving James behind. Just then, a woman passed by, saw James, and assumed he was with the older children. Worried that James or his injuries might reveal what had happened, Robert and John turned back to the boy. They called out to him again, and to their surprise, James got up and followed them. As they moved toward a busier street, several people saw the three boys, and some noticed the wound on James's forehead, but no one intervened. Their journey was long, stretching over 1.5 miles, and little James was exhausted. He cried and protested, but the kidnappers continued to drag him along. To keep him moving, they even fed him excessively. Along the way, James screamed for his mother repeatedly and attempted to escape, almost reaching a busy street, but the boys stopped him. Several passers-by noticed the situation and asked why the children were without their parents, but no one took action. Eventually, they arrived in a deserted area where Robert and John took turns carrying James up a hill before deciding to rest on some steps. An elderly woman, seeing James was red from crying and bruises, approached them and asked what was happening. The boys claimed they didn't know and said they had found him on the hill. Mistaking their intentions, the woman directed them to the nearest police station. However, the boys chose to head in the opposite direction. They had gone about 2 miles when they stopped at a store. Two women approached John and Robert and discovered that James was the child who had gotten lost at the Strengths Mall. One of the women asked James if he was okay, but he remained silent. When she offered to take them to the police station, John confidently said that he knew the way, so they continued walking. They visited several stores and stopped to watch a fire along the way. Along the way, they encountered some children who asked about James. Robert told them that James was his brother, and they continued on. They walked along the railway tracks for at least 4 kilometers. Around 5:30 p.m., they reached a street in the city and played with James for a while. Although they were near the police station and Robert's house, they returned to the railway tracks. John and Robert's behavior changed. First, they tore off James's hood and threw it into the bushes. Then, they forced him to crawl through a hole in the fence onto the tracks. They poured stolen green paint on James, causing him to scream when the paint got into his left eye. John and Robert used everything around them to injure James, chasing him and throwing rocks and bricks at him, even hitting him on the head with a steel bar. They took off James's shoes, pants, and underwear, and they physically abused James. After torturing James, John and Robert placed James on the train tracks and covered him with bricks before leaving. James was bleeding and had multiple injuries all over his body. When the train arrived, he was dead. John and Robert then went to a video store before returning home, where John's mother Susan saw them through the window. After being reported missing by James's family, police began investigating the case and reviewed security footage from Strength Mall. The footage showed 2 older children taking James away, which surprised police, who had assumed the kidnappers were adults. It was confirmed that the suspects were around 12 years old. The following morning, the security footage was shared with the media. James's mother, Denise, spoke to the press alongside her husband Ralph, expressing her anguish over her son's situation and pleading for his safe return home. The investigation into the disappearance lasted 2 days, during which time several tips were received. On Saturday, February 13, a search of the water company turned up nothing. On Sunday afternoon, a railway worker discovered what he thought was a doll on the tracks. However, he was unaware of James's disappearance at the time, so he did not pay much attention to it. Later that day, 4 children discovered James's body. At first, they mistook it for a cat and then a doll torn in half, but they soon realized it was a human body. Police went to the railway to inspect the reported area. Half of James's body was covered with a coat. It appeared that James had been placed there. The boy's body was half off the tracks and half directly on the tracks. 42 injuries were found on James, mainly on his face and head. The boy suffered multiple fractures, and his body also had numerous cuts and bruises. An investigation revealed that James had lost a significant amount of blood. A shoe-like mark was found, and several wounds below the waist suggested that James had been sexually assaulted. It was determined that James had died when the train passed by, as the extent of his injuries made it impossible to determine a specific cause of death. James's underwear was covered in blood. Nearby, police discovered a 60-centimeter-long iron bar, along with several stones and bricks. In addition, 3 AA batteries and a can of blue paint were found near the body. Many neighbors from the Merseyside area came to the railway to pay their respects to the boy. Among them was Robert Thompson, who left a rose for James. John, on the other hand, did not come but was very interested in the story of James. One day, John told his mother, "If I see those boys, I will kick them in the head." John's parents did not suspect John, although they saw some blue paint on his sleeves and he was wearing the same jacket seen in the surveillance camera footage. The community became confused. Some parents even began to worry about their children. Police reviewed school absentee lists and interviewed 60 children. A 12-year-old student was arrested, although he had not been charged with any crime. In response, neighbors vandalized his home by smashing windows. Police realized they were looking for older children than the actual suspects when they reviewed new footage from a parking lot camera. The video showed 2 boys walking with a baby, suggesting the kidnappers were likely under the age of 12. On the 4th day after the incident, a police officer from a nearby station contacted police. She reported that during a family gathering on Friday night, she noticed a dirty boy with paint on his clothes who had skipped school that day with a friend. The boy was identified as John Venables, aged approximately 10. Police then contacted John's school principal, who confirmed that John and his friend Robert had not attended school that day. 4 police officers arrived at Robert's house. When Robert saw the police, he began to cry. They had a search warrant and took some of his clothes. The officers immediately noticed blood on his shoes. Robert Thompson was arrested and taken to the police station for questioning. His mother was shocked when the police came to their house at 8 a.m. She even pointed out that there were traces of blue paint on her son's coat. When the police arrived at John's house, he, crying, said, "I didn't kill James." John was then taken into custody. At first, the police did not suspect either boy. They found it hard to believe that 2 children could commit such a crime. The 2 boys were taken into custody separately, and the police took fingerprints and blood samples from John and Robert's hair and fingernails. Police visited a store in the Strength Shopping Center after the owner reported seeing 2 boys standing in front of the window and touching items on Friday. Fingerprints belonging to Robert Thompson and John Venables were found on the glass. That same evening, Robert was questioned in the presence of his mother and lawyer. He was asked if he understood the difference between truth and lies, to which he responded that he did. When it was confirmed that he was at the shopping center, he attempted to deflect suspicion by saying he saw James that day, but claimed he was with someone else. John, who was familiar with Robert, denied any involvement in the kidnapping. Police noted that while Robert tried to shift blame onto John, he also denied his own involvement, stating he was with John but was not present during James's abduction. Robert pretended to cry when the police detected him lying, but the tears weren't real. The story began to unravel gradually. Initially, Robert stated that he saw John take the baby by the hand. However, the next morning, he admitted he had gone to the railroad with them. When the police brought up the stolen batteries, Robert felt ashamed. His mother encouraged him to be honest, and he confessed that he witnessed James being attacked with a brick. He insisted that he didn't participate in the violence. John was the only one responsible. Robert did acknowledge that he placed a brick on James's face while he was lying on the railway, supposedly to stop the bleeding, when the police questioned John. The questioning was difficult and had to be stopped frequently because John became very angry. John accused Robert of being a bad influence. At first, he denied being at the mall with Robert, but when he learned that Robert had confessed to being there, he admitted it. John struggled to keep his lie for a long time. Finally, after being repeatedly interrogated, he confessed that he had not only been at the mall, but had also killed James, but John claimed that he had been influenced by Robert. John recounted the events, starting with a walk around town and ending at the railroad. According to John, it was Robert who picked up James and threw him to the ground near the riverbank. John also claimed that Robert was responsible for the most horrific actions at the railroad. John was very cautious when the police brought up the batteries. He claimed to have no knowledge of Robert's involvement with the batteries. After a brief interrogation, John began to hit his father, who was sitting next to him, shocking the police. They now had enough evidence to charge John and Robert with the kidnapping and murder of James Bulger. Charges were filed on Saturday, February 20. James Bulger's funeral took place on March 1, 1993 in Kirby, with hundreds of people in attendance. During the investigation and trial, John and Robert denied all charges related to the case. The trial began in mid-May, and they were arraigned in adult court on November 1. Protests broke out outside the courthouse, leading to clashes with police. The murder of James Patrick Bulger by John Venables and Robert Thompson has caused outrage in the community. Evidence includes surveillance footage, paint and bloodstains on the 2 boys' clothing, A total of 38 witnesses have confirmed seeing the three children together on February 12. Many of these witnesses have been charged, as they lived in the area and did not intervene. Many believe they should have acted at the time to rescue James. Psychological evaluations of John and Robert have shown no mental disorders that would classify them as insane. John has unusual memories, including fantasies of rescuing James and returning him to his mother. Robert's psychiatrist has diagnosed him with symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The prosecution insisted that both boys understood the seriousness of their actions, although the defense claimed that they had no previous history of violence. On 24 November, the verdict was announced in front of Dennis Bolger. John Venables and Robert Thompson were found guilty. Robert remained silent while John wept as the verdict was read. They were sentenced to indefinite detention and held in separate facilities under false identities. The case remains controversial. In 1999, the European Court of Human Rights ruled that John and Robert's right to a fair trial was not protected, as the trial took place in an adult court. In 2001, after 8 years in prison, they were given suspended sentences and released early, also under false identities. Robert Thompson has lived a relatively peaceful life since his release, while John, who is in Nablus, has chosen a more dangerous path. In 2010, John was incarcerated for child abuse and violating his parole. After the death of her son, Denise remarried and had 3 children. Ralph Bolger also remarried and had 3 daughters with his new wife. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Sarah Starr. On November 27, 2017, at approximately 9 a.m., the Sherry County Sheriff's Department in Alabama, United States, received a call from a witness who believed her friend had taken her own life. Police were dispatched to a home owned by a local church. The home had previously been the pastor's residence, but had recently been rented out exclusively to church members. The tenant at the time of the incident was Sarah Starr, a recently divorced mother of 3. At 38, she had been married for 16 years, but her relationship had hit a rough patch, leading her to make the difficult decision to divorce. Sarah was at a turning point in her life, facing the challenges of being a single parent without her husband's support. She had to take on all parental responsibilities, including providing for the needs of the children since her husband did not help at first. However, without her husband constantly pressuring her, her situation seemed to improve. Life became easier for her. Sarah Starr was born in 1979 in the small town of LBI, Kansas, USA. She is a doting mother. She easily manages and cares for her children. She is a teacher at a local elementary school where she teaches literature. Sarah loves her job. People describe her as knowledgeable and calm, with the ability to engage and inspire students. Sarah's marriage to Jason began in February 2001 when she was 22 years old and had just graduated with a bachelor's degree in education. Jason, who was 28, had recently returned from military service. He had previously been married and had a son, but after facing disagreements with his first wife, they divorced. He was immediately drawn to Sarah's kindness and beauty. Initially, their marriage seemed stable and happy, and Sarah often shared how well things were going. However, there were growing concerns among friends and family about Jason's behavior. Many noticed that he would frequently insult and humiliate her in public. After 5 years of marriage, the couple had twins, then another set of twins, which was quite a rare event. She was overjoyed to become a mother of 4, but Jason was unhappy. The couple lived in a small town of Colby, Kansas, where they grew up, but they decided to move to Alabama. They rented a house in their new home and Jason found a job. In addition to his main job, he started a business. Meanwhile, Sarah became a stay-at-home mother, taking care of 4 young children and managing household chores. It was a lot of work, but she did it well. However, Jason's income was not enough, so Sarah took on a part-time job at a school. This increased her workload while her husband did not provide much support. Sarah found a strong community of believers and became an active member of her local Baptist church. Her easygoing and outgoing personality helped her settle into her new environment. In 2016, she became a 4th-grade teacher at a nearby elementary school. People described her as a very positive and friendly woman. However, behind her cheerful exterior, she faced difficulties, especially after she gave birth to her 2nd set of twins. Jason felt overwhelmed. He often lost his temper with Sarah because of the noise from the children, lack of sleep, and the mess they made. Sarah admitted that she was exhausted by this marriage. She decided to divorce and moved into a house provided by the church for a small fee and began the divorce process. Because of Jason's business, along with the division of assets and child custody, the divorce process could drag on for years. Fortunately, she had the support of her church, which helped her through the difficult times. Although Sarah was a devoted mother and managed her responsibilities well, the ongoing hardships took a toll on her mental health. She became increasingly anxious, frequently arguing with her husband, with Jason saying that Sarah focused on spending his money on unnecessary items and was addicted to shopping. This behavior worsened after their divorce, leading to significant financial difficulties. These made it difficult for her to sleep and she suffered from mild depression. When Sarah decided to move out of the house she shared with Jason, she asked her friends, Dana and Lawrence, a married couple, for help. They later remembered how anxious Sarah seemed during the move. She hurriedly tried to load her belongings into the car but kept forgetting items, forcing her to run back and forth from the house to the street multiple times. This frantic behavior raised suspicions about her mental state. Sarah was particularly worried that Jason might return while she was moving, as she didn't want him to find out and interfere. When Sarah and her friends arrived at her new home, Jason appeared. Lawrence then asked Jason not to enter, and Jason complied. Jason lingered near the house for a while before leaving. Lawrence recalled that when Jason appeared, Sarah was very scared. She was shaking and crying, and she had been suffering from stress and anxiety for a long time. She truly believed that Jason had come to harm her, especially since he had previously threatened her with violence if she asked for help. 2 years later, the divorce was finalized. They decided to share custody of their children. At that time, their twins were 12 and 7 years old. Jason was also ordered to pay monthly child support to all 4 children and his wife, who was still struggling financially. The divorce had a significant impact on Jason's finances. He was ordered to pay $3,000. At the time, Jason was earning over $6,000 a month, meaning the court ordered him to pay half of his income to Sarah. However, she did not receive any of his assets, so she continued to live in the church. Jason also moved out, but to a house near his ex-wife's house, where he now lives with his mother. On November 27, 2017, Sarah was expected to return to work after Thanksgiving, but she did not show up for class that morning, which was very unusual for her. Colleagues were unable to contact her as she did not respond to messages on various platforms, raising concern about her behavior. Some teachers speculated that something serious might have occurred. Consequently, a colleague was sent to check on her. Tragically, at around 8:30 a.m., they discovered Sarah outside her home with multiple gunshot wounds. Police determined that Sarah was likely the victim of a violent attack. They found that she had left her home around 6:30 a.m. to go to work but was shot in the chest shortly after. An unknown assailant had fired a shotgun at close range, also wounding her in the head. Neighbors later informed the police that they had heard gunfire that morning. However, Since it was a rural area where hunting was common, they did not think much. In these regions, residents often use firearms for hunting or to deter wild animals. Forensic experts found no fingerprints or tire marks at the crime scene. However, it was soon discovered that Sarah had just gone through a complicated divorce from her husband, which aroused the police's suspicions. Initial witnesses: Dana and Lawrence told police that Sarah's divorce followed a difficult marriage. During the final months of the divorce proceedings, Sarah expressed fear of her husband, believing that he might try to harm her. Jason lived only a few minutes' walk from her rented home. With this information, the police began to focus on the prime suspect, Jason. He was brought in for questioning, but he denied any involvement in Sarah's murder. He was released a few hours later when his alibi was confirmed. He had breakfast at a restaurant with his children, as evidenced by surveillance camera footage and witness testimony. Although Jason was released, suspicions surrounding him remained, as Jason had a strong motive to harm Sarah. Furthermore, Sarah's friends and family confirmed that she was terrified of Jason. A press conference was held to update the public on the investigation, during which it was announced that the state governor had offered a $5,000 reward for any information leading to Sarah's killer. A local resident later added another $500 to the reward fund. Unfortunately, these efforts were fruitless. Police asked for the public's help in providing vital information to help move the case forward, but no leads came up and the case stalled for years. The local sheriff's department cooperated with the state police. However, the case remained stalled until December 2021. Police believe Jason was involved in the crime, possibly hiring a killer. He had a motive, as he had to pay more than half of his income to his ex-wife and children. It is believed that financial disputes led to the murder, and although he tried to gain full custody of the children, he was unsuccessful in court. While searching Jason's computer, police discovered a manuscript for a book he planned to publish. The manuscript contained chapters discussing his relationship with Sarah. Jason expressed a strong desire to avoid paying her the court-ordered amount and considered ways to avoid paying her. His writings included many derogatory comments about Sarah and women in general, which added to the police's suspicions of him. Additionally, police reviewed Jason's financial transactions and discovered that between September 7th and November 15th, the year Sarah was murdered, he made 7 transactions totaling $2,600. These transactions were made between Jason and a person named Lily. The investigation revealed that Lily was friends with Jason's brother, Darren, and that they had no further financial interactions. Through discussions with Lily, police learned that Jason had gifted his brother Darren a 2016 motorcycle, which was a costly item. The reason behind such an expensive gift was unclear, especially since Jason did not seem to have the financial means to afford it. He defended his actions by saying that he had been in an accident, but chose not to report it to the police. Instead, Jason gave his damaged bike to Darren to repair. Darren estimated the cost of the repairs at $5,000. Jason decided to send the money through Darren's friend, Lily. The total amount transferred was $2,600, which Jason claimed was for the motorcycle repairs. However, police suspect that this may actually have been a way to repay a debt to Darren, who may have been involved in the attack and death of Sarah. It is believed that Lily was used to conceal payments for the crime and help conceal their involvement. His brother, Darren, is described as a difficult person who had a difficult life in Texas. Darren has a criminal record that includes a 2013 speeding arrest in which illegal drugs were found. Although he received a short sentence for drug possession, this history has raised suspicions about his possible involvement in more serious crimes. Police investigated the brothers' communications and data, including seizing their cell phones. They identified Darren as the new prime suspect in Sarah's case. He traveled to Alabama just before Thanksgiving 2017. Darren arrived in the area on November 18th and stayed for 10 days, often staying near Sarah's home. Darren's location was tracked, showing he was near the church and turned off his mobile phone around midnight, just before Sarah's murder. This behavior suggested he was watching the Sarah and trying to hide his location from the police. His phone was back on around 10 a.m. the next day, back in Texas. Later that day, he sent Jason a coded message about a successful deer hunt, indicating they were using coded language to communicate. One of Sarah's neighbors reported seeing a motorcycle that looked like Jason's near her house several times before the murder. Shortly after the crime, the same motorcycle was spotted leaving the area, which added to the evidence. Based on this information, police determined that Jason had hired Darren to kill his ex-wife, leading to serious charges against both men. In December 2021, Jason requested a lawyer and denied any involvement in the crime, confidently asserting that the police would have no evidence against him. However, he later confessed to killing Sarah, repeatedly stating that he was guilty. Despite his confession, he was released on bail pending a hearing, requiring him to wear an ankle monitor. His trial is set for June 27, 2022. Darren's situation was quite complex. He went into hiding, prompting a nationwide FBI manhunt. His photo was widely distributed, and initially, a $10,000 reward was offered for information leading to his capture, which later increased to $22,500. On February 5, 2022, Darren turned himself in Texas. He chose not to plead guilty and waived his right to wait for the hearing while under house arrest, instead opting to stay in prison until the trial started. Throughout this period, Jason and Darren frequently spoke on the phone, but their conversations were monitored, and they did not discuss anything that could be used against them. The preparation of the case was delayed because there was a lot of circumstantial evidence but not enough direct evidence. After the police completed their investigation, on September 11, 2023, the trial of Jason Starr and Darren Starr finally began. The prosecution aimed to determine Jason's financial motive, emphasizing that he did not want to pay more than half of his income to Sarah. They presented substantial circumstantial evidence, including Jason's contact with Darren's brother in Texas, his use of his motorcycle to travel to Alabama, and the transfer of money. Lily claimed that she was not involved in any wrongdoing. According to her statement, she was unaware of what the Jason and Darren were doing and was surprised to learn she could be seen as being an accomplice to the crime. Eventually, it was decided not to pursue any charges against Lily. The attorney pointed out that there was a lack of strong evidence. There was no murder weapon found and there were no witnesses to the attack in person or recorded on surveillance cameras. Jason's computer notes appear to be an expression of his emotions and frustration after losing custody of his children and facing significant financial burdens. These notes reflected his emotional state and not any intent to kill. Therefore, none of this could be considered direct evidence of a desire to kill. During the 10 days Darren was in Alabama, the brothers did not speak to each other. They may have used disposable phones purchased online to communicate. The lack of any physical evidence at the scene of the massacre, such as shoe prints, fingerprints, DNA, or even motorcycle tire tracks. In addition, the lawyer also presented a video showing Jason having breakfast with his children in a restaurant 10 kilometers from Sarah's house, which happened at the same time the attackers shot Sarah. Jason fully cooperated with the investigation from the beginning by allowing police to search his cell phone and computer. His attorney highlighted this point, trying to convince the jury that a true criminal would never allow such a search, especially if they knew about the evidence against them. However, this argument was not convincing, especially given Jason's behavior and his confession after his arrest. The trial lasted 6 days. The jury then spent 6 hours deliberating their verdict. Ultimately, the jury decided that Jason Starr and Darren Starr were guilty of murder and conspiracy to murder. On January 4, 2024, both were sentenced to life in prison without parole and ordered to pay a $25,000 fine. Darren's attorney later announced plans to appeal the verdict, while Jason's defense attorney remained silent on the matter due to Jason's confession to the murder. The children were placed in the care of Sarah's parents. In court, the older twin expressed a desire to cut ties with their father, stating that they no longer wanted to see him,